Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when the ordinary flipped into something truly wrong. Most people, when they hear a story like mine, assume it starts with a loud bang or a chilling scream. But real fear, the kind that digs into your bones and stays there, often begins with a whisper, a slight shift in the air, a feeling you can't quite name. I was 26 then, fresh out of college, and trying to make a living as a freelance photographer. It sounded glamorous, but mostly it meant long hours, low pay, and chasing down every odd job that came my way. One of those jobs was for a regional tourism board. They wanted scenic shots of some of the less traveled routes in the Pacific Northwest, focusing on the raw, untouched beauty. Perfect, I thought. A chance to build my portfolio, get paid, and explore. My car at the time was an old, trusty Subaru Outback. It had seen better days, but it was reliable, good on gas, and had enough clearance for the dirt roads I often found myself on. That particular morning, the weather was classic Oregon spring. A soft, persistent drizzle had just given way to patchy sunlight, leaving everything glistening and smelling of damp earth and pine. I'd set out early before dawn, aiming to catch the morning mist over the foothills. My planned route took me deep into what felt like forgotten country, a network of winding state highways that eventually thinned out into narrow, unmarked roads. I was alone, which wasn't unusual for these shoots. I preferred it, actually. Less distraction, more focus. I had my gear bag on the passenger seat, a thermos of lukewarm coffee, and a crumpled map that was more of a suggestion than a guide. GPS was spotty out here, so old-school navigation was the order of the day. My mission for the afternoon was to get some shots of a particular, supposedly historic tunnel, the Blackwood Pass Tunnel. It wasn't a major landmark, just an old single-lane passage carved through a stretch of granite mountain, bypassed by a more modern highway years ago. The brief mentioned its unique moss-covered entrance and the way the light played off the damp rock inside. A bit niche, sure, but a job was a job. The initial mistake, I realize now, was cutting it a little too close with my fuel. I'd meant to fill up at the last small town I passed, but I got distracted by a perfect shot of a hawk circling an old-growth forest and just kept driving. By the time I remembered, the next gas station on my map was still a good 60 miles away, well past the tunnel. Plenty of gas, I'd muttered to myself, glancing at the gauge, which showed just under a quarter tank. Famous last words, right? It wasn't empty, not by a long shot, but it added a subtle layer of anxiety to the back of my mind. A minor vulnerability, but enough to make me slightly less comfortable than I should have been. Another small error was my timing. I was aiming for the golden hour light, that magical time just before sunset, to get the best pictures of the tunnel's interior. That meant I'd be there as dusk approached, in a place notorious for its lack of cell service and general isolation. Usually I'm meticulous about safety, checking in with friends, sharing my route. But that day I was running behind schedule and skipped the call. I'll be back before dark, I'd promised myself. The road to Blackwood Pass Tunnel was long, straight, and then suddenly very steep and winding. The forest grew dense here, ancient trees pressing in on both sides, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a natural canopy that blocked out much of the sky. The air grew cooler, heavier, and the sunlight, which had been so bright just moments ago, now filtered through the thick leaves in muted, moss-colored streaks. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, but also incredibly isolated. I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. Finally, the road straightened again, and there it was. Not grand or imposing, but exactly as described, an unassuming, almost forgotten entrance to the mountain. It was a dark, yawning maw ringed by damp, clinging moss and ferns like the entrance to some ancient, forgotten crypt. A faded, graffiti-scarred sign nailed to a tree read, "Blackwood Pass Tunnel Caution, Unlit." Beyond the entrance, the darkness was absolute, a solid block that seemed to swallow the weak afternoon light. I pulled over a little way from the entrance, killed the engine, and just sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of deep, oppressive quiet that makes your ears ring, a quiet that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a heavy presence. My breath plumed faintly in the cool air inside the car. I grabbed my camera bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped out. The forest air hit me, cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine needles and wet earth. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, traced its way down my spine. The tunnel's entrance loomed, an ink-black void against the muted greens and grays of the surrounding woods. I took a few wide shots of the exterior, trying to capture its gothic beauty. The light was fading fast, but the moody atmosphere was perfect. Then I turned my attention to the interior. This was the shot I needed. I pulled out my tripod, mounted my camera, and took a deep breath. Even from here, 10 feet back, the darkness felt thick, almost tangible. As I took my first tentative steps toward the entrance, the sound of my own boots crunching on the gravel seemed unnaturally loud, echoing in the profound stillness. The air temperature dropped noticeably, feeling several degrees colder inside the tunnel's mouth. I could feel the dampness clinging to my skin. Then it happened. Not a sound, not a sight, not anything dramatic at all. Just a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air pressure, a kind of internal thrum that I felt more than heard. It was like the subtle pop you feel in your ears when you drive over a mountain pass, but without the corresponding change in elevation. It was fleeting, easily dismissed as my imagination, or perhaps just the wind playing a trick, but it was there. A small, unsettling ripple in the otherwise heavy stillness, and it made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. The darkness in the tunnel seemed to deepen, to solidify, pulling at the edges of my vision. It was the first seed of dread planting itself firmly in the pit of my stomach. The internal thrum lingered, a phantom vibration against my eardrums long after the air had settled. My hand, already reaching for the tripod, froze. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to get in the car, to drive away and not look back. But the rational part of my brain, the one that had to pay rent and buy groceries, quickly asserted itself. It was just a tunnel. An old, isolated, unlit tunnel. The cold, the damp, the deep quiet, they were all natural consequences of its environment. My imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the spooky atmosphere, was playing tricks. That's all it was. It had to be. Still, the unease gnawed. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady my pulse. My eyes, even with the fading light behind me, struggled to penetrate the solid blackness of the tunnel's interior. It wasn't just dark, it was a hungry, absorbing darkness. "Right," I murmured aloud, the sound thin and insignificant, immediately swallowed by the vast quiet. Just a job. I rummaged in my camera bag, pulling out my headlamp. It was a sturdy, bright model meant for night hiking and spelunking. Clicking it on, a focused beam of stark white light sprang into existence, cutting through the gloom. It felt like a meager weapon against the monumental darkness, but it was something. I adjusted it on my forehead, the elastic strap cool against my skin. The beam painted a small circle of clarity on the damp gravel floor just inside the entrance. It revealed glistening rock walls, slick with moisture and patches of emerald moss, and a ceiling that seemed impossibly high and arched. Taking another fortifying breath, I picked up my tripod. My boots crunched again, louder this time, each step a declaration against the profound silence. The air grew colder, much colder, and I could taste the mineral tang of wet rock and decaying leaves. The entrance, now behind me, seemed to shrink, the gray light of dusk receding as I ventured deeper. The tunnel didn't feel like a natural formation. It felt carved, excavated, and the rough-hewn rock surfaces, despite their covering of moss, retained a raw, unfinished quality. There were no lights, of course, no signs of maintenance. It was just a cold, dark maw, a passage forgotten by time and progress. My headlamp beam bounced along the walls, picking out droplets of water clinging like jewels, and highlighting the occasional, unsettling glint of something metallic embedded in the rock. Just iron pyrite, I told myself, or some other common mineral. Nothing to worry about. I walked slowly, deliberately, my tripod held out like a divining rod. The darkness ahead remained absolute, impenetrable, beyond the reach of my lamp. The sound of my own footsteps, the soft tap-tap of my tripod against the ground, the rustle of my jacket, these were the only sounds, amplified and distorted by the enclosed space. It was like being inside a giant, echoing ear. My objective was the way the light played off the damp rock. I needed to go deep enough that the natural light from the entrance was completely gone, and then use my own light sources along with long exposures to capture the tunnel's unique character. This wasn't just a point-and-shoot job, it required patience and a steady hand. About 20 yards in, the last vestiges of daylight vanished behind me, leaving me in total, artificial illumination. The air grew heavier, denser, and the silence became a tangible weight. It pressed in, making my ears ache, making me acutely aware of my own breathing, which now sounded ragged and too loud. I set up my tripod, extended the legs, and mounted my camera. The act of focusing, adjusting the aperture, setting the shutter speed, it was a calming ritual, a professional distraction from the growing unease. I fired off a few test shots, the click of the shutter loud and stark in the stillness. The digital display showed the raw, unedited images, stark, black and white streaked rock, the damp floor, the cavernous ceiling. They were good, atmospheric. But something was missing, the feeling, the oppressive, ancient feeling that was seeping into my very bones. "Okay," I whispered, pulling a small, powerful LED panel from my bag. I wanted to add some directional light, mimic the play of natural light I'd lost. I clipped it to a small mini tripod, adjusted its intensity, and placed it to one side, aiming it at a particularly moss-covered section of the wall. As I crouched, adjusting the LED, the thrum returned. This time it wasn't faint. It was stronger, a deeper resonance that vibrated not just in my ears, but through the soles of my boots, up my legs, and into my chest. It was a low, guttural hum, like an engine running deep underground, or the sustained note of an enormous, unseen bell. It lasted only a second or two, but it was unmistakable. My breath hitched, I straightened up abruptly, my headlamp beam sweeping wildly around the tunnel. Nothing, just the glistening rock, the moss, the endless dark. But the feeling, the absolute certainty that something had just shifted was undeniable. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching dread. "Hellos," I called out, my voice thin and reedy. It bounced off the walls, a mockery of a reply. "Is anyone there?" Silence, deeper, more profound than before. The air felt colder, prickling my skin. My eyes darted around, trying to penetrate the darkness beyond my headlamp's beam, straining for any movement, any flicker of reflected light. There was nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at the edges of my composure. This wasn't just a spooky old tunnel anymore. This was wrong. The kind of wrong that made the hair on your arms stand up and every fiber of your being scream danger. My instincts, which I had so easily dismissed minutes ago, were now roaring. I considered leaving, just pack up, get out, and forget the shot. But then a stubborn pride kicked in, mixed with a healthy dose of self-recrimination. I was here, I was committed, and what if it was just my imagination? What if some geological process, a distant tremor, or even an odd wind current had caused the vibration? Turning tail now would feel ridiculous. Besides, the sound was gone. Maybe it was a one-off. Maybe I was just overtired. Trying to calm my rapidly beating heart, I forced myself to focus on the task. I reframed the shot, adjusted the camera settings, and took a few more long exposures. The pictures, even on the small screen, were incredible. The play of light on the damp stone, the ancient textures, it was exactly what the tourism board wanted. As I reviewed one shot, my lamp beam still playing over the wall, I saw it. Just at the very edge of the light, where the rock met the absolute darkness, there was something, not metallic, not moss, something carved. My heart lurched again. I walked closer, shining my headlamp directly on the spot. It was a symbol etched into the rock, faded with time and dampness, but undeniably man-made. It wasn't graffiti. It was too intricate, too deliberate. A circle with a jagged, almost claw-like symbol extending from its center, resembling a twisted, broken cross or a stylized hand with too many fingers. It looked ancient, primal, and deeply unsettling. I traced the lines with my finger, the rock cold and slick beneath my touch. It wasn't just one symbol. As my lamp beam moved, I saw more. A series of them repeating, carved into the stone at irregular intervals, leading deeper into the tunnel. They were old, very old, covered in a thin film of algae and dust, almost invisible until caught by the direct light. These weren't the kind of carvings you'd find in a tourist trap. These felt ritualistic, ominous. They were warnings, or perhaps invocations. A shiver, icy and profound, crawled up my spine. This tunnel wasn't just a passage through a mountain. It felt like a gateway to something else entirely. I hesitated, my mind racing. What kind of people carved symbols like this in an abandoned tunnel, and for what purpose? My earlier resolve to stay and get the shot began to crumble under the weight of this new, unsettling discovery. The air, already cold, now felt heavy with an unspoken presence. I knew I should leave. Every fiber of my being screamed that. But a strange, morbid curiosity had taken root, entwined with the lingering professional obligation. What if these symbols were historically significant? What if they were part of the untouched beauty the tourism board wanted, albeit in a darker sense? And what if just a little further in there was something even more remarkable, something that would make my portfolio sing? This was the kind of unique discovery that could launch a career. I told myself I'd just go a little further, just to see where the symbols led, just to get a few more shots. I packed up my LED panel, leaving the camera mounted on the tripod for now, and began to follow the carvings. Each step was heavy, deliberate. The symbols seemed to multiply, becoming more frequent, more varied. Some were geometric, others vaguely anatomical, hinting at distorted figures or limbs. They pulsed in and out of view as my headlamp danced across the rock like silent sentinels guarding an unknown secret. The tunnel began a subtle descent, the air growing even colder, carrying a faint, earthy smell that was not entirely unpleasant, but alien. It was the scent of damp earth, yes, but mixed with something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood and decaying leaves. I held my breath, trying to dismiss it as simply the smell of a deep, enclosed space. Then I heard it again, a sound distinct from the thrum, a faint, rhythmic drip, 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 not water. It sounded too heavy, too viscous, and it was coming from deeper within the tunnel. My heart hammered again. I stopped dead, listening. The dripping continued, an unsettling counterpoint to the absolute silence of the tunnel. It was slow, deliberate, each drop echoing with a morbid finality. It was too regular to be natural water seepage. A knot of pure dread formed in my stomach. My headlamp beam, now fixed on the source of the sound, illuminated a narrow side passage I hadn't noticed before. It was almost perfectly concealed by an overhang of rock, a dark slit in the wall that looked more like a fissure than a deliberately constructed passage, but the symbols led straight to it. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry, every instinct screamed to turn back. This was beyond the scope of the job, this was beyond normal, this was dangerous. But the symbols drew me in, the dripping drew me in. My professional curiosity mixed with a chilling, almost hypnotic pull was too strong to resist. I had to know, I had to see. I grabbed my camera, took it off the tripod, and slowly, carefully began to approach the side passage. The air here was even colder, and the earthy, metallic scent intensified, making my stomach clench. The dripping sound grew louder, each drop seeming to resonate directly inside my skull. As I neared the entrance to the side passage, my headlamp beam finally cut through the deepest shadow, and there it was. Not a pool of water. A dark, viscous liquid, glistening like oil, was dripping from a point in the passage's ceiling onto a jagged rock below. It pooled there, a shimmering, opaque black puddle that seemed to absorb my headlamp's light rather than reflect it. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't identify the liquid. It certainly wasn't water. It was too thick, too dark, and the smell, so distinct and unsettling, was strongest here. It smelled of decay, yes, but also something else, something cloyingly sweet, like stagnant blood and iron. My stomach churned. The symbols continued into this passage, etched deeper, appearing fresher than the ones in the main tunnel. They seemed to hum with an unseen energy, beckoning me further. This wasn't just old carvings, this was an active or recently active site. Against all reason, I stepped into the side passage. It was narrower, forcing me to turn sideways in places, the rough rock scraping against my jacket. The air was heavy, still, and strangely oppressive. My headlamp struggled to penetrate the density of the air, creating a confined, claustrophobic sphere of light. The passage snaked downwards, becoming steeper, its floor slick with the same dark liquid that dripped from the ceiling. I had to move cautiously, my hands brushing against the damp, cold rock walls for balance. The dripping sound faded as I moved away from the source, replaced by the squelch of my boots in the viscous liquid underfoot. This was no natural cave. This was definitely man-made, or at least heavily modified. The walls, though rough, showed clear signs of tools, ancient picks and chisels, rather than the smooth erosion of water. The further I went, the more the symbols appeared, sometimes carved right into the floor, covered by the black ooze. The passage opened into a small chamber. My headlamp beam swept across it, revealing rough, uneven walls, a low ceiling, and a floor that was entirely covered in the dark, pooling liquid. It reflected my headlamp, creating an unsettling, shimmering black mirror. In the center of the chamber, something stood. It was a crude altar fashioned from several large, flat stones stained black with the same viscous liquid. On top of it, arranged in a chilling tableau, were several objects. My breath hitched. A collection of small, crudely carved wooden figures resembling distorted humanoids stood upright. Around them, carefully placed, were dried, brittle flowers, their petals dark and withered. But it was the other items that truly solidified the horror. Bones, small animal bones arranged in a circular pattern around the wooden figures, and nestled amongst them something else, something that made my blood run cold. A small, intricately carved bird made not of wood but of bone, and another, and another. These weren't animal bones, not entirely. They were too small for an adult human, but definitely too large for most small animals. And their shape, they were disturbingly similar to finger bones. Human finger bones carved into macabre art. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. The metallic, sweet smell was overwhelming here, mixed with a deep, musty odor of decay. It was sickening. I stumbled back, my foot splashing loudly in the black liquid. The sound echoed, jarringly loud in the oppressive silence. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized me. This was a place of ritual, of sacrifice. This was not just wrong, it was profoundly evil. My mind screamed, get out now. I spun around, desperate to retrace my steps to escape this nightmare chamber. My headlamp beam danced wildly, my hands fumbling for purchase on the slimy walls. As I turned, my beam swept across the far wall of the chamber, directly opposite the altar. And there, etched into the rock, far larger and more intricate than any other symbol I had seen, was a carving. It was the main symbol I had seen before, the twisted, claw-like hand or broken cross, but this one was surrounded by concentric circles, like ripples in a dark pond. And beneath it, etched into the stone, were more symbols, a language I didn't recognize, but which felt ancient, malevolent. It wasn't just a carving, it was a focal point, an anchor. And from the very center of the largest circle, the viscous black liquid seemed to well up directly from the rock itself, slowly weeping down the wall, joining the pool on the floor. As my eyes registered this horror, a sound, faint but unmistakable, reached my ears. A soft, almost imperceptible scrape, like something dragging. It came from the main tunnel, from the direction I had just come. My heart leaped into my throat. My blood ran cold, solidifying in my veins. I froze, every muscle taut, my breath held captive in my chest. I extinguished my headlamp, plunging myself into absolute, suffocating darkness. The sudden lack of light was disorienting, terrifying. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the frantic thump of my heart echoing in the blackness. The air, heavy with the stench of decay and iron, pressed in on me, suffocating. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. It was slow, deliberate, a dragging weight against the gravel and rock, not footsteps, something being pulled, or something that couldn't walk. The terror, primal and overwhelming, seized me. I was trapped, deep in a forgotten tunnel, in a hidden chamber of ritual and horror with something unknown approaching. My hand instinctively clamped over my mouth, stifling a terrified whimper. I backed away slowly, silently, trying to press myself into the damp, cold rock wall of the chamber. The viscous liquid on the floor squelched softly under my boots, a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. I had to move, had to hide, had to find a way out. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. It was definitely in the main tunnel now, nearing the entrance to this side passage. There was a faint, almost inaudible hiss that accompanied it, like something slithering or like dry leaves rustling under immense pressure. My eyes, completely useless in the absolute darkness, darted wildly. I tried to orient myself, to remember the layout of the chamber, the direction of the passage leading back to the main tunnel. But the panic had shattered my sense of direction, leaving me lost in the terrifying blackness. The scraping stopped. A new sound, even more horrifying, replaced it. A wet, guttural inhale, like a gasp but not human, something deep, resonant, and utterly inhuman. It seemed to vibrate through the very rock of the chamber, rattling my teeth. Then a low, rasping murmur, not words but sounds. A series of deep, resonant clicks and whistles, like stones grinding together or dry bone being scraped across rock. It was a language, or perhaps a communication of something ancient and utterly alien. It was coming from just outside the entrance to my hidden chamber. It was there. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. I pressed myself harder against the cold, damp rock, desperately trying to merge with it, to become invisible. My heart felt like it would explode from my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by a terror so profound it was physical. The guttural sounds continued for a long, agonizing moment. They seemed to be directed at the chamber, at me. A deep, unsettling knowing settled upon me. Whatever was out there, it knew I was here. It had known all along. Then the sound ceased. Silence descended once more, but this was a different kind of silence. It was a predatory silence, thick with anticipation, heavy with unseen eyes. I could feel its presence, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on me, filling the chamber. It was a palpable thing, an entity, not just the absence of sound. I waited, a lifetime compressed into seconds. My muscles ached, my head pounded. My entire being screamed to run, but where? In this absolute darkness, I was blind, helpless. Suddenly, a faint, sickly green luminescence flickered into existence at the entrance of the chamber, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. It wasn't a light source I recognized. It was organic, diffuse, and seemed to pulse faintly, like the glow of deep-sea bioluminescence or something decaying. As the light intensified, it revealed a shape. It stood just outside the chamber entrance, its form distorted by the strange light, but undeniably large, hunched. It was barely visible in the weak glow, a silhouette against the slightly less black background of the main tunnel, but enough to send a fresh wave of terror through me. It was impossibly tall, unnaturally thin, and seemed to be made of shadows and angles. Its limbs were long, spindly, ending in things that looked like hands, but with too many joints, too many sharp points. Its head was small, tucked into its shoulders, and from it 2 points of the same sickly green light pulsed like eyes. Eyes that were fixed on the chamber, fixed on me. It was not human, it was not animal. It was something from a nightmare brought to chilling, horrifying life. My mind rebelled. This couldn't be real. This was a hallucination. My brain, under extreme stress, was manufacturing images. But the cold, the smell, the sounds, they were all too real. The creature took a step into the chamber. Its gait was a terrifying lurch, a fluid, unnatural movement of its elongated limbs. Each step made a soft, squelching sound in the black liquid on the floor. As it moved further into the chamber, the green light emanating from it grew slightly stronger, revealing more detail. Its skin, if it was skin, was a mottled gray-black, taut over an unnaturally defined musculature. It seemed to shimmer faintly, as if constantly wet or covered in a thin membrane. No hair, no clothes, no features save for those two pulsing green lights that served as its eyes. It moved with a terrifying slowness, its head cocked as if listening. It seemed to smell the air, its movements deliberate, predatory. The very air around it felt heavy, vibrating with an unseen energy. I instinctively clamped my hands over my mouth again, trying to stifle any sound, any telltale gasp. My heart hammered, so loud I was sure it would give me away. I closed my eyes, a desperate attempt to make it disappear, to unsee the nightmare. But the image was burned into my mind. The sickly green glow, the unnatural form, the palpable sense of ancient malice emanating from it. I opened my eyes again, unable to resist the horrifying compulsion to look. It was closer. It was now fully within the small chamber, its massive, skeletal form dominating the space. It moved towards the altar, its glowing eyes sweeping over the crude carvings, the bone artifacts. It seemed to pause there, its long, jointed fingers hovering over the altar, almost touching the carved bone bird. There was no emotion on its face, no expression, just a cold, calculating stillness. Then it slowly, deliberately turned its head, and its two green eyes, pulsating with that unholy light, fixed directly on my hiding spot. It knew it had always known. A low, guttural rasp, like dry leaves scuttling across a tombstone, emanated from its throat. It was a sound of recognition, of sinister acknowledgement. I could feel its gaze, a physical pressure, even in the faint light. It wasn't just looking at me, it was seeing me, piercing through my pathetic attempt at camouflage. My mind screamed, every muscle in my body coiled, preparing for an escape I knew was probably futile. I was trapped, cornered, utterly at its mercy. It took another step, then another, its movements slow, deliberate, closing the distance between us. Each squelch of its feet in the viscous liquid was a hammer blow against my terror-stricken nerves. The green light intensified, bathing me in its ghastly glow. My breath hitched, I squeezed my eyes shut, a pathetic, last-ditch effort to deny what was happening. My mind raced, trying to find an exit, a weapon, anything, but there was nothing. Only the cold, damp rock, the suffocating darkness, and the approaching horror. I could feel the heat, or perhaps the cold, radiating from its proximity. The smell of decay and iron was overwhelming. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was the end. My rational mind, my pride, my professional obligations, all gone, replaced by a raw, instinctual fear. It was just feet away now. I could hear its ragged, wet breathing, the faint, chitinous rustle of its movement. I could almost feel its breath, cold and stale, on my face. My hand, trembling uncontrollably, reached for the only thing I had that might offer some protection, some light, some semblance of control. My headlamp. It was still clipped to my forehead, but I needed to turn it on, aim it, do something. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled desperation, I fumbled for the button on the headlamp. My finger, slick with sweat, slid across the casing, struggling to find purchase. The creature paused. I could feel its gaze, its presence, intently focused on my movements. It was waiting, watching. Finally, my finger found the button. I pressed it, and a blinding beam of pure white light erupted from my forehead, cutting through the oppressive gloom directly into the creature's face. There was a sudden, violent hiss, not unlike a snake, but deeper, more primal. The creature recoiled sharply, its spindly limbs jerking back. The green light from its eyes flared erratically, then dimmed. It let out another sound, a high-pitched, chittering shriek that scraped against my eardrums, echoing painfully in the confined space. It stumbled backward, its form thrashing in the narrow chamber, its elongated limbs flailing against the rock walls. The sudden, intense light seemed to genuinely hurt it, or at least disorient it. This was my chance. Without another thought, fueled by a surge of pure, desperate survival instinct, I turned and bolted. My boots splashed and slid in the black liquid as I scrambled through the side passage, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly, illuminating the horrifying symbols on the walls. I heard another shriek, louder this time, behind me. The sound of its movement, a sickening squelch and scrape, was hot on my heels. It was coming after me. I burst out of the side passage and into the main tunnel, not daring to look back. My headlamp beam, now steady, cut a path through the profound darkness. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed myself harder, faster than I ever thought possible. The tunnel stretched out ahead, seemingly endless, a terrifying black maw leading to a distant, unseen exit. The symbols on the walls seemed to twist and writhe in my peripheral vision, mocking my flight. The scraping and squelching sounds behind me grew louder, closer. It was gaining. The chittering, guttural sounds started again, a terrifying symphony of pursuit. I could feel its presence, a cold, oppressive weight at my back. It was fast, unnaturally fast. My legs were screaming, my lungs were on fire, but the image of those glowing green eyes, that skeletal form, spurred me onward. I had to get out. I had to see daylight again. I heard a loud thump behind me, followed by a shower of small rocks. It must have hit the wall, or perhaps something else. I didn't slow down, I couldn't. Suddenly, a massive, spindly arm shot out from the darkness behind me, its claw-like hand swiping through the air just inches from my head. I felt the rush of displaced air, the terrifying proximity of its touch. A terrified scream tore from my throat. I stumbled, nearly falling, but somehow regained my footing and kept running, blindly, desperately. My headlamp beam finally illuminated something ahead, a faint, distant glimmer of gray light, the entrance, the blessed, glorious exit. It was still so far, but it was there. Hope, a fragile, desperate thing, flared in my chest. But the creature was right behind me. I could hear its labored, wet breathing, feel its proximity. It was almost upon me. I pushed myself harder, every fiber of my being dedicated to reaching that sliver of light. My vision tunneled, focused solely on the exit. Another arm, or perhaps the same one, lashed out. This time it connected. A sickening, searing pain exploded in my left shoulder as something sharp, impossibly strong, clamped down, digging into my flesh. I cried out, a raw, animalistic sound of pain and terror. The force of the impact spun me around, sending me stumbling, my headlamp beam whirling wildly across the tunnel walls. My camera, still clutched in my right hand, flew from my grasp and clattered to the ground, its lens cracking with a sickening crunch. I fell hard, my knee twisting painfully as I landed on the damp, rocky floor. The creature was over me in an instant, its glowing green eyes burning into mine from inches away. Its putrid, earthy breath washed over me, a physical assault. My left shoulder throbbed with excruciating pain, blood already seeping through my jacket. I could feel the sharp, bone-like digits digging deeper into my flesh. It held me pinned, its immense weight pressing down, paralyzing me with terror and pain. Its head cocked, those terrible eyes fixed on me. It made a series of low, clicking, guttural sounds, a language of pure malevolence. It was no longer shrieking. It was observing, studying. I could see its form clearly now, illuminated by my headlamp, which had miraculously remained on and was now angled upwards, casting grotesque shadows across its terrifying features. Its skin was indeed mottled and wet like a swamp creature, but with an underlying hardness almost like rock. Its mouth, now visible, was a gaping, toothless maw, an abyss of blackness within its shadowed head. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. This was it. This was truly the end. There was no escape, no hope. Then a flicker. A flicker of light from behind the creature. Not my headlamp, not the creature's own eerie glow. Something else, something stronger. And then a sound. A distant, faint thrum, not the internal one I'd felt before, but a deep, resonant rumble. It vibrated through the tunnel, through the rock, through the very air. It was a familiar sound, a human sound, an engine. Headlights. Distant but unmistakably approaching, a vehicle. The creature's head snapped up, its green eyes darting towards the source of the sound. Its grip on my shoulder loosened, ever so slightly. The rumble grew louder, closer. The distinct roar of an engine, tires on gravel. It was fast, coming straight for the tunnel. The creature let out a low, frustrated hiss. Its body tensed, its glowing eyes darting between me and the approaching light. Then, with a sudden, violent shove, it released me. The pain in my shoulder flared agonizingly, and I cried out as I rolled away, hitting the damp ground with a thud. The creature didn't hesitate. With an impossible burst of speed, it turned and darted back into the deeper, darker reaches of the tunnel, dissolving into the blackness as quickly as it had appeared. Only the faint, lingering scent of decay and iron remained, a phantom whisper of its presence. The roar of the engine intensified, echoing deafeningly through the tunnel. And then, a blinding flash of high beams, cutting through the darkness, illuminating the tunnel walls, the scattered rocks, and my own trembling, bloodied form. The vehicle was almost upon me. A pickup truck, its engine straining, its high beams blazing, screeched to a halt just yards away, its tires kicking up dust and gravel. The driver's side door flew open, and a figure, silhouetted against the bright lights, jumped out. "Hey, are you okay?" a gruff voice shouted, full of concern and alarm. I lay on the cold ground, my shoulder throbbing, my body shaking uncontrollably, gasping for breath, unable to form a coherent response. The sheer relief mixed with the lingering terror was overwhelming. I was safe, for now. But the image of those glowing green eyes, that impossible form, was seared into my mind, a chilling testament to the horror I had just endured. The Blackwood Pass tunnel was no longer just an old, forgotten passage. It was a gateway. And I had stumbled through it. The blinding flash of the truck's high beams was a physical shock, tearing through the darkness and the remnants of my terror. I lay sprawled on the cold, damp ground, my left shoulder screaming in agony, my body racked with tremors. Every muscle clenched, every nerve ending pulsed with the ghost of the creature's touch, the scent of its putrid breath. The sudden shift from absolute darkness and visceral fear to brilliant, albeit harsh, light and the presence of another human was almost too much to process. My brain felt like a scrambled mess of fear, pain, and profound, dizzying relief. The figure who jumped from the truck was a man, broad-shouldered and solid, silhouetted against the powerful headlights. He moved with a no-nonsense gait, his voice gruff but laced with genuine concern. "Hey, are you okay?" he shouted, his words echoing in the vast, sudden quiet of the tunnel, the engine now idling, a low thrumming counterpoint to the silence. I tried to answer, but my throat was tight, my lungs still burning from my desperate sprint. A strangled gasp was all I managed, punctuated by a shudder that rocked my entire body. I pushed myself up, scrambling backwards on my hands and knees, away from the spot where the creature had held me, away from the deeper darkness where it had vanished. My headlamp, still illuminating the immediate area with its stark white beam, highlighted the fresh blood seeping through my jacket, stark against the dark fabric. The man was beside me in an instant, dropping to one knee. He was older than me, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s, with a weathered face framed by a thick, graying beard and kind, steady eyes. He wore a faded flannel shirt and sturdy work pants, practical clothing for this kind of remote country. "Whoa, take it easy there," he said, his voice softening as he saw my state. "You're hurt. What in tarnation happened to you?" He reached out a hand, but I flinched violently, memories of the claw-like digits still too fresh. He stopped, his expression shifting from concern to something more wary, understanding. "Easy, girl, I ain't gonna hurt ya. Name's Silas Blackwood. I live just up the road." Silas Blackwood, the name of the tunnel, a strange coincidence or something more. My mind, even in its chaotic state, latched onto the detail. I don't know," I stammered, the words finally tearing their way out, thin and hoarse. "Something in there, it grabbed me." I gestured wildly with my right hand towards the black depths of the tunnel. Silas followed my gaze, his brow furrowing. He looked into the darkness, then back at me, his eyes scanning my injured shoulder, the frantic fear etched on my face. "Something? What kind of something?" He didn't sound entirely skeptical, just perplexed. The relief of a human presence of safety was slowly allowing the adrenaline to dissipate, leaving me hollow and weak. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, welled in my eyes and spilled down my cheeks. It was the sudden release of all the pent-up terror, the acknowledgement that I had almost died. I don't know, it wasn't human. It was a monster," I choked out, the word feeling utterly inadequate to describe the horror I'd witnessed. Tall, thin, green eyes, it was going to kill me. Silas's expression tightened. He looked back into the tunnel again, a different kind of intensity in his gaze now. He was taking me seriously. "A monster, huh, in Blackwood Pass?" He muttered the last part to himself, almost as if testing the words. "My shoulder," I whimpered, the pain now asserting itself with brutal clarity. It cut me." Silas gently pushed aside the torn fabric of my jacket and shirt. A gasp escaped him. The wound was deep, a series of parallel lacerations, raw and bleeding freely, as if raked by something with impossibly sharp talons. It was a vicious injury, not something easily dismissed. All right, we gotta get you out of here, get that cleaned up," he said, his voice firm, regaining his composure. He looked around, then spotted my camera lying on the ground, its lens cracked, a stark contrast to the perfect photos I'd hoped to capture. "You're a photographer, then?" I nodded mutely, still struggling for breath. "All right, can you stand? I'll help you to the truck." He moved slowly, giving me space, then offered a hand, carefully avoiding my injured side. With his help, I pushed myself to my feet, my legs wobbly and weak. Every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my shoulder. The black, viscous liquid on the floor of the tunnel was slick beneath my boots, a horrifying reminder of the chamber. As Silas helped me hobble towards his truck, my headlamp beam swept across the ground. I caught a glimpse of something small and metallic. My car keys, which must have fallen out during my frantic escape. I bent down, wincing, and snatched them up. A small victory. He guided me to the passenger side of his battered but well-maintained Ford pickup. The interior smelled faintly of old coffee and pine. He helped me into the seat, his movements surprisingly gentle. "Just lean back, take a deep breath," he instructed. He then retrieved a first aid kit from under the seat, a surprisingly comprehensive one. "We need to put some pressure on that. It's bleeding pretty good," he said, carefully peeling back my torn shirt. I bit back a cry of pain as he pressed a thick gauze pad against the wound. "You got a name, girl?" "Emily," I whispered, my voice still shaky. "Emily Carter." "All right, Emily, I'm gonna get you to my place. It's the closest thing to help out here. Got a landline, too, if you need to call someone." He made sure the gauze was held firmly in place, then closed the door, went around to the driver's side, and got in. Before he started the truck, he looked into the tunnel one last time, his gaze lingering on the oppressive blackness, then on the ground near where I'd fallen. He seemed to be searching for something. I shivered, wondering what he might have seen, or more chillingly, what he might not have seen that I knew was there. The truck rumbled to life, and Silas slowly backed up, turning the vehicle around. As the truck moved, its high beams once again swept across the tunnel entrance, illuminating the ancient moss-covered archway. For a brief, terrifying second, I imagined I saw a flicker of movement, a ripple in the absolute blackness just beyond the range of the lights, before we drove past it, and the tunnel was swallowed once more by the encroaching dusk. The drive was short, maybe 10 minutes down a gravel road that branched off the main path to the tunnel. Silas's home was a modest, sturdy cabin nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines. A plume of smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, and a faint, warm glow emanated from its windows. It looked like a beacon of sanity in a world that had just been irrevocably shattered. Inside, the cabin was cozy and rustic, filled with the scent of wood smoke and a faint, comforting aroma of stew. A roaring fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls adorned with hunting trophies and old photographs. It was the epitome of a mountain recluse's home. Silas led me to a worn armchair near the fire. "Sit down, I'll get some fresh water and clean supplies," he said, already moving with purpose. He returned quickly with a basin of warm water, antiseptic, and more gauze. He worked methodically, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wound. I winced and hissed, but he was patient, his expression grim. "Those are deep scratches, Emily. Looks like something with long, sharp nails. Or claws," he said, his eyes meeting mine. There was a question in his gaze, an unspoken acknowledgement of my earlier words. I nodded, my eyes wide and still brimming with unshed tears. Claws, it had claws, and it was gray and wet like a frog, but huge, and its eyes were green, glowing green. The words tumbled out, disjointed and frantic, but I couldn't stop them. It was like something out of a nightmare, Silas. It wasn't real, but it was. It was so real. He finished bandaging my shoulder, a surprisingly neat and professional job. It's real enough to leave this mark, that's for sure, he said, looking at the fresh white bandage. You're lucky to be alive, girl. Whatever it was, it meant business. He then brewed a strong cup of herbal tea, handing it to me with a steady hand. The warmth of the mug in my hands, the earthy scent of the tea, was a small anchor in the storm of my mind. Now, Silas said, sitting opposite me, his gaze serious. Tell me everything from the beginning and don't leave anything out. And so I did. I recounted the whole terrifying ordeal, from the moment I felt the internal thrum at the tunnel's entrance, to the discovery of the symbols, the hidden chamber, the viscous black liquid, the altar with its macabre bone figures, and finally the appearance of the creature itself. I spoke of its unnatural movements, its terrifying silence, its glowing eyes, the primal fear it invoked. I described the way it had pursued me, the searing pain of its grasp, and the sudden, inexplicable retreat at the sound of his truck. Silas listened intently, his face unreadable, occasionally stroking his beard. He didn't interrupt, didn't scoff, didn't try to rationalize away the impossible. He just listened, his eyes fixed on mine, absorbing every detail. When I finished, the cabin was silent, save for the crackling fire and my own ragged breathing. An altar, he murmured, his gaze distant, lost in thought. Bone carvings, black liquid, and something that wasn't human. He looked at me then, his eyes deep and troubled. You've stumbled onto something ancient, Emily, something local folk have whispered about for generations. My blood ran cold. Whispered about, you mean other people have seen it. Silas sighed, a heavy sound. Not exactly, not like you have anyway, but this tunnel, it's always had a bad reputation. Stories of disappearances, of strange lights, of folks going in and never coming out. They say it's cursed, haunted, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. He paused, then continued, his voice low and serious. My family, the Blackwoods, we've been in these parts for a long, long time, generations, and the stories have been passed down about things in the mountains, things that shouldn't be, things that are old, older than the trees, older than the land itself, almost. The tunnel, they say, was dug by the first settlers a long time ago, but before that, this whole ridge was sacred ground to the indigenous tribes. But not sacred in a good way, sacred in a feared way, a place to avoid. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. They spoke of the Weeper, a creature of shadow and stone that guarded a place of immense darkness. It was said to take things, animals, sometimes people, especially those who trespassed where they weren't meant to be, and it was said to have eyes like embers and to reek of damp earth and iron. The description sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. The Weeper, I repeated, the name feeling heavy on my tongue, because of the dripping liquid. Silas nodded slowly. That's what the old stories say, that the black liquid, it's its tears or its blood or something far worse, a sign of its presence. And the symbols, they sound like the markings described in the old legends, warnings or perhaps methods to contain it, or, God forbid, to summon it. Summon it, the idea was horrifying. Who would summon something like that? He shook his head. I don't know, Emily. The old stories are vague on that, just that some things are best left undisturbed. My own grandfather, he warned me never to go near that tunnel after dark. never said it was where the old ones stirred. But you went in, I pointed out, remembering his appearance. You were coming from the tunnel. Silas gave a grim smile. I heard your car earlier today. Sounded like you were headed that way. Then a little while ago, I saw your Subaru parked near the entrance. I usually keep an eye on folks going up there, especially tourists. It gets dark fast and people often get lost or stuck. When I saw your car still there as night was falling and no sign of you, I got a bad feeling. Decided to go check on you. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. But what caught my attention most was that rumble, that deep thrum you described. I heard it too from my cabin. It's an old sound. I've heard it before, very rarely, always from the direction of the tunnel. It always meant trouble. Something was stirring. And then not long after, I heard screams. Your screams, I reckon. That's when I jumped in the truck and floored it. So the thrum wasn't my imagination, and my screams had been loud enough to carry to his cabin. The reality of it all settled over me like a shroud. This wasn't just a random encounter with an unknown beast. This was something ancient, something tied to the very land, and Silas Blackwood knew about it. We have to do something, Silas, I said, my voice gaining a desperate urgency. That thing, it's still in there. What if it comes out? What if someone else goes in? Silas leaned back, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. It stays in the tunnel, mostly. It's a guardian, they say, tied to that place. It doesn't like the sun, and it doesn't like bright light. Your headlamp, that was a smart move, Emily. It bought you time. But it came after me. It grabbed me. Because you were in its sacred space, its nesting ground, and you saw things you weren't meant to see, Silas countered, his voice quiet. The altar, the bones, those are part of its domain. You desecrated it in its eyes, or perhaps you simply awoke it. A cold dread spread through me. So what now? Do we call the police, the park rangers? Silas let out a short, mirthless laugh. And tell them what, Emily? That a monster with glowing green eyes and claws attacked you in a forgotten tunnel. They'd call you crazy, or worse, they'd think you're on drugs. They'd probably blame it on a bear or a mountain lion, despite the obvious differences. Even if they believed you, what could they do? Send a squad of officers in with flashlights. It'd be a massacre. This ain't something bullets can stop. He had a point. The creature was too unnatural, too otherworldly. Standard law enforcement protocols would be useless, even dangerous. So we just let it be, I asked, incredulous. Let it stay there, waiting for the next person. For now, we have to. We don't have the means to fight it, Emily. It's been there for centuries, maybe millennia. The old ways were to respect its territory, to leave offerings at the entrance sometimes, to keep it calm, to acknowledge its presence without challenging it. He paused, his gaze softening. You're lucky, Emily, you survived. Most don't if the old stories are true about crossing its path. The full weight of his words settled over me. I had survived an encounter with an ancient, possibly supernatural entity that had been preying on people for centuries. It was a lot to take in. My entire worldview had been shattered in a single afternoon. I need to call someone, I said, my voice still weak but firm. My family, my friends, they'll be worried. Of course, Silas said, nodding. He pointed to an old rotary phone on a small table near the wall. Landlines there, it's usually good. Sometimes the lines go out in storms, but it should work. I walked over to the phone, my movements still stiff and painful. My hands trembled as I picked up the receiver and dialed my parents' number. It rang several times, and then, to my immense relief, my mother's voice answered, laced with a mixture of concern and exasperation. Emily, where are you? We've been worried sick. You were supposed to call hours ago. Mom, I'm okay, I said, the words catching in my throat. I had an accident. I'm at a cabin with a man named Silas. He helped me. I kept my explanation vague, not wanting to sound completely insane over the phone. I just told her I'd gotten lost, run out of gas, and fallen, injuring my shoulder. I promised to call again in the morning and make my way back as soon as I could. She sounded relieved but still concerned, insisting I get checked out by a doctor immediately. After hanging up, I felt a faint pang of guilt for not telling her the truth, but how could I? How could I explain glowing green eyes and bone altars over a crackling landline? Is she okay? Silas asked from his armchair. I nodded. Yeah, just worried. I told her I fell. Good, best not to go spreading tales that folks ain't ready for, he advised. Now you look dead on your feet, Emily. I've got a guest room. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and safe. You can stay here for the night. We'll figure things out in the morning. I was too exhausted, too traumatized, and too relieved to argue. Thank you, Silas. Really, you saved my life. He just gave a small nod, his eyes still holding a deep, weary knowledge. Go on, get some rest. I'll make sure the cabin is secure. He showed me to a small, Spartan room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window looking out into the dense, silent forest. It was clean and smelled faintly of cedar. As I lay down, every muscle aching, my shoulder throbbing beneath the bandage, I pulled the thick woolen blanket up to my chin. The warmth of the fire from the living room, the comforting presence of Silas in the next room, slowly began to lull me. But sleep was a long time coming. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, the glowing green eyes, the skeletal form, the gaping maw. I replayed the chase, the sickening crunch of my camera, the feeling of its claws digging into my flesh. The smell of decay and iron seemed to linger in my nostrils. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the cabin, the creak of old wood, the distant hoot of an owl, the crackle of the fire. The silence of the forest outside was a heavier silence than I was used to, pregnant with unseen things. I kept expecting to hear the soft scrape of its movement, the wet squelch of its feet in the mud. I felt exposed, vulnerable, even within the sturdy walls of the cabin. Finally, sometime in the pre-dawn hours, exhaustion claimed me, dragging me into a fitful, nightmare-ridden slumber. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, a silent scream caught in my throat. Sunlight was streaming through the window, painting stripes across the wooden floor. The cabin was quiet, no more nightmares. For a moment, the relief was so profound it bordered on euphoria. Then the memories crashed back, a wave of cold reality. My shoulder throbbed. The bandage was stiff with dried blood. It hadn't been a dream. I got up slowly, carefully, testing my sore limbs. The cabin smelled of coffee now and something savory cooking. I made my way to the living room. Silas was at the kitchen counter, frying bacon and eggs. He looked up as I entered, a faint smile on his lips. Morning, sleepyhead. How's the shoulder? Sore, I admitted, but better than I expected. Good, got some breakfast ready. Best thing for a fright. We ate in comfortable silence, the normalcy of the meal a balm to my frayed nerves. The food was simple but delicious, filling, and comforting. Silas seemed less guarded in the morning light, though his eyes still held that knowing, somber quality. After breakfast, he insisted on changing my bandage. The wound, while still angry and raw, seemed cleaner. You'll need a doctor for this, Emily, definitely stitches. And probably a tetanus shot, judging by the look of it, he said, his voice practical. I know, I replied, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. How would I explain this to a doctor? I couldn't just say a monster attacked me. We need to get your car out of there, Silas said, pulling on a heavy jacket. Can't leave it just sitting there, might attract unwanted attention or worse, get scavenged. My camera, I remembered suddenly. It's still in the tunnel or near the entrance. A flash of regret, a lingering thread of professional duty mixed with fear. Silas considered this. We're not going into the tunnel, Emily, not for anything, but we can check around the entrance. Maybe it's still there. The thought of going back even just to the entrance made my stomach clench, but my car and my equipment couldn't just be abandoned. Okay, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We drove back in Silas's truck, the morning light painting the forest in hues of emerald and gold. The air was crisp and cool, the kind of perfect Pacific Northwest morning that seemed to mock the horror of the previous night. As we approached the tunnel, my heart began to pound again. It loomed ahead, a dark maw even in the sunlight, still ringed by moss and ferns. It looked exactly as it had before, unassuming and quiet, too quiet. Silas parked the truck a little way from the entrance, closer than I had yesterday, but still a cautious distance. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from his truck, a powerful, tactical model, and a large wrench. Stay close to me, Emily, and keep your eyes open. This thing might not like daylight, but it's not helpless. I clutched my car keys, my headlamp still clipped to my forehead, ready to turn it on at a moment's notice. The familiar scent of damp earth and pine was overlaid with a faint, metallic tang that made me want to gag. We approached the entrance slowly, cautiously. The gravel crunching under our boots seemed unnaturally loud. My Subaru was still there, exactly where I'd left it, a forlorn sight. All right, let's get your car out of here first, Silas said, walking towards it. He checked the gas tank. You were running pretty low, weren't you? I nodded sheepishly. I got distracted, meant to fill up. Always fill up, he admonished gently, especially out here. He got into my car, and to my relief, it started with a familiar grumble. He backed it out and then pulled it alongside his truck. We'll tow it to my place later, then I can take you to the nearest town with a gas station and a mechanic. Next, my camera. I remembered dropping it when the creature attacked me, closer to the tunnel entrance than the side passage. Silas shone his powerful flashlight over the ground. After a moment, he spotted it. It lay on the damp gravel just inside the tunnel's mouth, its cracked lens glinting weakly. There it is, he said, gesturing with his light. Stay here, I'll get it. No, I cried, my voice sharper than I intended. I'll go, it's my camera, just stay alert. I felt a strange, illogical pull. I needed to retrieve it myself. It was my job, my livelihood, and a small act of defiance against the fear. Silas looked at me, a worried frown on his face. All right, but don't go a foot further than you need to, and if you feel anything, you turn and run. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked slowly towards the entrance, my headlamp already on, its beam adding to the daylight that filtered into the first few yards of the tunnel. The air immediately grew colder, heavier. The metallic smell was stronger here. My camera lay where I had seen it, an expensive piece of equipment now rendered useless. I bent down, ignoring the throbbing pain in my shoulder, and picked it up. The lens was shattered, the casing dented. A wave of sadness washed over me. It was more than just a camera. It was a tool, a partner in my craft. Now it was a broken relic of a horrifying experience. As I stood up, cradling the damaged camera, my gaze drifted to the tunnel wall. The symbols, they were still there, faint in the filtered light, but undeniably present. The twisted, claw-like hand, the concentric circles. My eyes, now accustomed to discerning them, saw them more clearly, even in the semi-gloom. Then I saw something else. On the gravel, just a few feet from where I had picked up my camera, there was a dark, viscous smear. It was the same black liquid from the chamber, but here it was mixed with something else. Something gray and fibrous, almost like dried mud, but with an unsettling, organic quality. And a few large, jagged stones, disturbed and scattered, as if something immense had scraped against the wall. This was where it had hit the wall, or where it had thrashed. This was its trail. A sudden, overwhelming chill permeated my body. I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to flee. I backed away, my eyes still fixed on the smear, then on the symbols, then on the deepening blackness of the tunnel. "Emily, you all right?" Silas's voice, sharp with concern, broke through my terror. "Yeah," I gasped, clutching my broken camera. "I'm coming." I hurried out of the tunnel into the reassuring sunlight, feeling as if I had just escaped a physical grip. Back at the truck, I showed Silas the smear. He knelt, examining it closely, touching it with the tip of his finger. "It left its mark," he said, his voice low and grim. "This confirms it, not just in the chamber. It came this far, and that gray stuff, it's part of it, some kind of residue." He stood up, looking at me with serious eyes. "We need to get you out of here, Emily, away from this place, and fast." We spent the next hour securing my Subaru to the back of Silas's truck with ropes and chains. The physical labor, despite the pain in my shoulder, was a welcome distraction, a return to the mundane. While Silas worked, I felt a new resolve forming. I couldn't just leave this behind. I couldn't just run and pretend it never happened. This was real, and I had a story to tell. I remembered my camera bag, which I'd dropped when I initially went into the tunnel. After Silas had secured my car, we searched for it. We found it where I'd left it, near the entrance, covered in a light layer of dust and pine needles. Everything inside seemed intact except for my LED light panel, which had been crushed when I dropped it during my flight. My headlamp, however, was still clipped to my forehead, a small miracle. I felt a surge of gratitude for the sturdy little device that had saved my life. With both cars secured and no further signs of the creature, we finally left Blackwood Pass Tunnel behind. As we drove away, I looked back, watching the dark entrance disappear around a bend in the road. It was still there, the gateway to an ancient horror, waiting in the shadows. Silas drove me to the nearest town, which was still a good hour and a half away. It was a small, sleepy place with a single main street, a gas station, a general store, and a diner. He dropped me off at the local clinic, insisting I get my shoulder looked at immediately. "I'll wait for you," he said, "then we can figure out what to do about your car and getting you to a bus or train station." The clinic was small, staffed by a friendly but no-nonsense doctor named Dr. Ramirez. She took one look at my shoulder, cleaned it again, and confirmed Silas's assessment. Deep lacerations, definitely stitches, and a tetanus shot. "This looks like an animal attack," she said, her brow furrowed. "A large animal by the spacing of these marks. What happened, honey? A bear, a cougar?" I hesitated. This was it, the moment of truth. I couldn't tell her about the weeper. I just couldn't. I was hiking, I stammered, avoiding eye contact. I startled something. I didn't get a good look. It was dark. It just came at me from the brush. It was a flimsy story, but it was all I had. Dr. Ramirez looked skeptical, her gaze lingering on my face, but she didn't press. She probably saw plenty of odd injuries from hikers and hunters in these remote parts. Well, whatever it was, it gave you a nasty gouge. You're lucky it didn't do more damage. She gave me a local anesthetic, stitched me up, and gave me a prescription for antibiotics and pain medication. She also gave me a stern lecture about hiking alone in the wilderness without proper precautions. I nodded, feigning contrition, while my mind was still reeling from the actual horror. After an hour, I emerged from the clinic, my arm in a sling, a bottle of pills in my bag, and a distinct feeling of unreality hanging over me. Silas was waiting in his truck, parked patiently. "All done?" he asked as I climbed in. "Yeah, 6 stitches, antibiotics, tetanus shot," I sighed, and a story about a surprise animal attack. Silas grunted a knowing sound, best for everyone involved. "What about my car?" I asked, "and how do I get out of here?" "I talked to old man Peterson at the gas station," Silas said. "He runs a small garage. He can fix your tire and take a look at your engine if you want. As for getting out, there's a bus that comes through here twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. Today's Thursday. So you could wait till tomorrow, or I could drive you to the nearest big town with a bus depot or even an airport. It's about a 3-hour drive, though." I considered my options. Waiting felt too long. I wanted to be as far away from Blackwood Pass as possible. "Could you drive me? I'll pay for your gas, of course, and for your time." Silas waved a hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that, Emily. I wouldn't feel right leaving you stranded out here. Consider it part of the rescue fee." He gave a faint smile. "Besides, I don't get out much. A drive might do me good." And so we set off. The drive was long, the landscape slowly shifting from dense, ancient forest to more cultivated, open farmlands, then eventually to the outskirts of a small city. We talked, or rather, I listened. Silas spoke of his life in the mountains, his family history, the changing nature of the wilderness. He spoke of the balance of nature and how some things were just beyond human understanding, best left alone. He reiterated his warnings about the tunnel, about the Weeper, but this time I listened with a chilling certainty that he wasn't just spinning folktales. He was speaking from experience, from generations of inherited knowledge. He dropped me off at the bus station in a city called Ashland. "Take care of yourself, Emily," he said, looking at me with a warmth that felt like a parental farewell. "And remember what I told you, some doors are best left closed." "I will, Silas," I replied, a lump in my throat. "Thank you for everything." I pressed a wad of cash into his hand, insisting it was for his trouble, for the gas, for the time. He reluctantly accepted, nodding. As he drove away, I watched his truck disappear down the street, feeling a profound sense of loss and gratitude. He was the last link to the nightmare I had just endured, and the only person who truly understood what I had seen. I boarded a bus bound for Portland, the largest city in Oregon, where I had a small apartment. The journey was long and tedious, but it provided a much-needed buffer, a transition back into the normalcy of the human world. As the bus rolled through the night, I stared out the window, watching the blur of passing lights, feeling utterly disconnected from the bustling lives. Of bustling lives she was now rejoining. The familiar rhythm of the city when the bus finally pulled into the station felt like a jarring symphony after the oppressive silence of the mountains. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that went beyond physical tiredness. My left arm, cradled carefully in its sling, throbbed with a dull ache, a constant physical reminder that the horror had been real. My small apartment in Portland, usually a sanctuary, felt alien and cold when I finally unlocked the door. The familiar scent of old books and coffee grounds did little to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I dropped my camera bag and duffel on the floor, the broken camera still clutched in my right hand like a talisman, its shattered lens staring up at me, a silent witness to the chaos. The next few days blurred into a haze of pain, restless sleep, and a gnawing sense of disorientation. My shoulder screamed with every movement and the stitches pulled uncomfortably. I swallowed the antibiotics and pain medication religiously, but they did little to soothe the deeper wounds of my mind. Every shadow seemed to lengthen and twist. Every creak of the old building sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Sleep, when it finally came, was plagued by vivid, terrifying nightmares. I relived the chase, the sickening crunch of my camera, the feeling of those bone-like claws digging into my flesh. The glowing green eyes of the creature were seared into my eyelids, appearing every time I closed them. I tried to explain my injury to a couple of close friends who called, but the flimsy story about a hiking accident and a startled animal felt hollow and unsatisfying. Their sympathy, though genuine, felt like an insult to the terrifying truth. How could I make them understand something so utterly beyond their grasp? I kept the details vague, brushed off their offers to visit, retreating further into myself. My parents called again, insisting I come home for a few days, but I couldn't bear the thought of facing their questions, their worried gazes, without being able to tell them the full, insane truth. The world outside my apartment felt muted, unreal. I tried to go grocery shopping once, but the crowds, the bright lights, the mundane chatter of everyday life felt overwhelming. I found myself scanning every face, every shadow, half expecting to see those glowing green eyes, that impossible form. The metallic tang of decay and iron seemed to linger in my nostrils, a phantom scent that made my stomach churn. I felt like an alien in my own life, a stranger returned from a dark, forgotten corner of the world. But beneath the fear and the exhaustion, a different emotion began to simmer, a burning, obsessive curiosity. Salaz's words echoed in my mind. You've stumbled onto something ancient, something local folk have whispered about for generations, the Weeper, tied to that place, guardian. I couldn't let it go. The experience, as horrifying as it was, had irrevocably altered me. My world, once neatly ordered by science and reason, had been torn open, revealing a terrifying abyss beneath. As a photographer, a seeker of truth and beauty in the natural world, I felt a perverse compulsion to understand what I had witnessed. It was a professional challenge, a personal quest for answers, and perhaps a desperate attempt to regain some control over a reality that had spiraled out of control. My broken camera lay on my desk, a monument to my folly and my survival, but I still had my camera bag thankfully intact. Inside, among my spare lenses and filters, I found a small notepad I used for jotting down notes and sketches. With my right hand, my left still in a sling, I carefully drew the symbols I remembered seeing in the tunnel, the twisted, claw-like hand or broken cross surrounded by concentric circles, the unknown language beneath it. I sketched the crude altar, the bone figures, the sickening black liquid. These weren't just random scrawls, they were pieces of a puzzle, clues to an ancient mystery. I started my research cautiously. Mainstream searches yielded nothing about the Weeper in Blackwood Pass. The tunnel itself was mentioned only as an abandoned railway passage, a minor historical footnote. No reports of strange creatures, no local legends documented in official archives. It was as if the horrors of that place existed only outside the realm of recorded history. I expanded my search, delving into indigenous folklore of the Pacific Northwest. I spent hours online, then ventured gingerly to the local university library, seeking out obscure texts, anthropological studies, and regional histories. It was slow going. Many indigenous traditions were oral, not written, and what little was recorded often used veiled language, allegory, or terms that were difficult for an outsider to decipher. I found references to various forest spirits or mountain guardians across different tribes, but nothing concrete that matched my experience. Some spoke of malevolent beings, shadow creatures, or entities tied to sacred, often dangerous places. There were tales of stone men or skinwalkers in some traditions, but these didn't quite fit the description of the Weeper. I looked for anything about a creature that dripped black liquid or had glowing green eyes or was associated with ancient altars. Nothing definitive. It was frustrating, like trying to piece together a mosaic from fragments scattered across different continents. One evening, after another fruitless day of digging through dusty tomes, I stumbled upon a digitized collection of old regional newspapers from the early 20th century. Sifting through digitized microfilms, I found a few intriguing snippets. Reports of unexplained disappearances in the Blackwood Pass area, often attributed to the wild elements or recluses gone mad. One particularly chilling article from 1908 described a logging camp near the pass being abandoned overnight, the workers fleeing in terror, leaving all their equipment behind. The foreman interviewed later spoke of unnatural sounds and a palpable sense of dread that had settled over the camp for days before they finally broke. No mention of a creature, but the fear was palpable, even in the dry newspaper prose. Another article from the 1930s detailed the mysterious death of a surveyor working in the Blackwood Pass area. His body was found mangled, wounds unlike any known animal attack, and the report mentioned a strange, viscous residue found on his clothing. The death was eventually ruled a tragic accident, the residue dismissed as swamp muck. My blood ran cold. Viscous residue. It sounded too much like the black liquid. These fragmented accounts, though not directly mentioning the Weeper, painted a consistent picture. Blackwood Pass was a place of unease, a locus of unexplained phenomena and dark events. It was enough to tell me that Silas's stories weren't just campfire tales. There was a deeper, darker truth to them. My shoulder healed slowly. The stitches were removed, leaving a faint, jagged scar, a permanent brand from my encounter. But the mental scars were deeper, more pervasive. The apartment, once a comfort, now felt like a cage. I felt a growing restlessness, a need to confront the horror, not just research it from a safe distance. I knew I couldn't go back alone, and I needed more information. Silas was my only real connection to this world, the only one who truly understood. I debated calling him, unsure if I was overstepping, if I was pulling him back into something he wanted to forget. But after a week of agonizing, the need for answers outweighed my hesitation. I called Silas using the landline number he'd given me. It rang several times, the old-fashioned sound echoing in my quiet apartment before he answered, his gruff voice instantly recognizable. Silas, it's Emily. Emily, good to hear from you. How's that shoulder healing up? His voice was warm, a welcome anchor. It's better, thanks. The stitches are out, but I can't stop thinking about it, Silas, about what happened, about the Weeper. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a heavy silence that spoke volumes. Figured as much, he finally said, a sigh escaping him. It ain't something you just forget, is it? No, I agreed, my voice low. I've been doing some research, old newspaper articles, indigenous folklore. There are whispers, silas, things that match up. Disappearances, strange deaths, talk of a viscous residue. He said, his voice grim. It's always been there, dormant sometimes, but never truly gone. I warned you to leave it be, Emily. I knows, I replied, and I appreciate your warning, but I can't. Not after what I saw, not after what it did to me. I need to understand, Silas, I need to know more. What more is there to know? He asked, a hint of weariness in his tone. It's a creature from another time, tied to that ground, a guardian of something ancient and dark. That's all anyone really knows. But the altar, I pressed, the symbols, the bone carvings, that implies ritual, doesn't it? Someone built that altar. Someone performed those rituals. Is it still active? Who would do something like that? Another long silence. That's a rabbit hole you don't want to go down, Emily, trust me. But I have to, Silas, I was there. It almost killed me. I can't just pretend it didn't happen. What if it gets out? What if it hurts someone else? You said it's been active for centuries. If there's a way to stop it, or at least understand it, I need to know. He sighed again, a sound of resignation. All right, Emily, I can tell you're not gonna drop it. You got that fire in your belly, same as your kind always do, looking for answers. My grandfather used to say that curiosity kills more than any beast, but sometimes it saves folks too. What do you mean, my kind? I asked, confused. Photographers, researchers, those who dig where they shouldn't, he clarified. My grandfather had dealings with a few of 'em over the years. Folks who came asking questions about the past, most of 'em left empty-handed. Some didn't leave at all. A shiver went down my spine. Silas, you seem to know more than you're letting on, about the altar, about the rituals. Who would do this? He paused, collecting his thoughts. Look, Emily, this isn't just about the Weeper. It's about something else, too, something human. There was a family a long time ago, the Marrow family. They settled near the pass even before my own ancestors. They were different. They practiced strange beliefs, kept to themselves. Whispers said they revered the mountain, revered what was in the mountain, made offerings. Offerings, my voice was barely a whisper. The bone carvings flashed in my mind. Sometimes animals disappeared from nearby farms. Then after a while the marrows themselves started to dwindle, one by one, until they were just gone, vanished. No one ever found out what happened to them, but the stories persisted, that they were too deep into the mountain's secrets, that they woke something they couldn't control, or that they became part of it. So you think they built the altar? I asked, a horrifying realization dawning on me. Likely they were the ones with the strange symbols, the knowledge of the local stones, and the affinity for that kind of dark magic, if you can call it that, Silas said, his voice grim. The Marrows and their rituals, they were a big part of why my own family started warning folks away from the tunnel. After they disappeared, things got quieter for a while. The Weeper went dormant mostly. But whatever they started, whatever spell they wove, it stayed. That altar, those symbols, they're a remnant of their work. And you think someone is continuing it? I don't know, Emily. The Marrow line died out as far as anyone knows. But this region, it attracts a certain kind of person. Folks who are drawn to the hidden, the forgotten, the occult. It wouldn't surprise me if some modern-day fool tried to pick up where the Marrows left off, trying to harness something they don't understand. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me, not just a creature, but human collaborators or successors. It added a whole new layer of unsettling complexity to the mystery. Silas, I said, a decision forming in my mind. I need to go back, not into the tunnel, not alone, but I need to revisit the area. I need to photograph it, document it, and I need your help. I need someone who knows the land, who understands the risks. You're the only one. He was silent for a long moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, weighing the dangers, the futility, against my unwavering determination. Emily, he finally said, his voice heavy, this isn't a game. That thing almost killed you once. It knows you now. And if there are other people involved, that adds a different kind of danger. Humans can be far worse than any monster. I know, I insisted, but I can't live with not knowing. I can't live with the fear, and I can't let this thing just exist, hidden, waiting to hurt someone else. I have to try. He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound. All right, but we do it my way, no heroics, no going into that tunnel again. We observe, we document, we try to find out if there's any active foolishness going on, and if things get hairy, we get out. Understood? Understood, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. He was in. It wasn't just my fight anymore. Good, give me a few days. I need to make some preparations, and you need to be fully healed. When can you make it back up here? I can be there by the weekend, I said, eager to get started. All right, call me when you're leaving Portland. I'll meet you in the nearest town, the one with the clinic. We'll park your car at my place, take my truck, less conspicuous, and bring a proper flashlight, a bright one, and something to defend yourself with if you got it. A hiking stick, maybe. Nothing that can kill it, but something to keep it at bay. I promised to be ready. The conversation ended, leaving me with a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration. I was going back. I was going to face my fear, armed with a new resolve and a knowledgeable ally. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I bought a new, high-powered professional camera body, a durable, weather-sealed model, along with a wide-angle lens. I invested in extra batteries, memory cards, and a tactical headlamp with multiple brightness settings. I researched survival gear, purchasing a sturdy hiking backpack, a multi-tool, a first aid kit, and durable boots. I even bought a heavy-duty camping lantern, its powerful beam designed to cut through the darkest night. For defense, as Silas suggested, I bought a robust hiking pole made of aircraft-grade aluminum. It wasn't a weapon, but it felt better than nothing. I packed my most rugged outdoor clothing, preparing for cold, damp conditions. I also delved back into my research, this time with a more focused approach. The Marrow family. I found only scant references to them in local historical societies, mostly census records indicating their presence and then eventual disappearance. There was no clear explanation for their sudden vanishing. A brief mention in a local history book speculated they might have moved east during the Great Depression, but there was no evidence to support it. The air of mystery around them was thick and unsettling. By Saturday morning, I was ready. My shoulder felt strong, though the scar was still tender. I packed my new gear into my Subaru, feeling a surge of nervous energy. As I drove out of Portland, the city lights receding in my rearview mirror, I felt a familiar dread, but also a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about escaping a nightmare anymore, it was about understanding it. The drive back to the mountains was quieter this time. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was already at Blackwood Pass. I pulled into the small town of Ashland late afternoon, the same place Silas had dropped me off. I parked my Subaru at the clinic parking lot as instructed and waited. Silas arrived a few minutes later, his familiar Ford pickup pulling up beside my car. He climbed out, a weathered canvas hat pulled low over his eyes. He looked me over, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You look better, Emily, more determined," he observed, a hint of approval in his voice. "Good, you'll need it." He helped me transfer my gear to his truck, making sure everything was packed securely. My new camera, carefully protected in its padded bag, felt like an extension of my arm. "We'll leave your car here for now, it's safer. My place is too isolated for an extra vehicle," he explained. As we drove towards his cabin, the familiar scenery unfolded around us. Towering pines, winding roads, the encroaching shadows of the forest. The air grew cooler, heavier, imbued with the scent of damp earth and pine. My heart began to quicken its pace. "So what's the plan, Silas?" I asked, breaking the silence. He gripped the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the road. "First, we're going to my place. We'll eat, get a good night's rest. Then tomorrow morning we head out. We're not going directly to the tunnel. We're going to approach it from a different angle. There's an old logging trail that comes in from the north through a denser part of the woods. It'll give us a different perspective and a better chance of spotting if anyone else has been active around there." "You think someone is active?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "Hard to say, but the Weeper's activity, it often coincides with human foolishness. Sometimes it's drawn out by people looking for trouble. Other times it's just doing its job, protecting its ground. But that altar, that means someone was actively messing with forces beyond their understanding." He continued, "We'll set up a perimeter around the tunnel entrance. Far enough back that we're not provoking anything, but close enough to observe. We'll use your camera, take photos, see if anything has changed. We're looking for signs of recent activity, human or otherwise. Footprints, discarded items, new markings, anything that could point to people being there, still engaging in these rituals." "And what if we find something?" Silas looked at me, his eyes grim. "Then we assess. If it's just residual activity, old markings, we document it and maybe try to figure out a way to report it without sounding crazy. If we find evidence of active cult-like behavior, people still performing these dark rituals, then we have a different problem. That's a police matter. But proving it, that's the hard part." "And if we see the Weeper?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. "Then we make ourselves scarce. We don't engage, we don't provoke. We retreat as fast as our legs can carry us. Your powerful lights will be your best friend, Emily. They saved you once, they might save you again, but don't count on it. This thing is ancient. It learns." His words were a stark reminder of the danger. The casual way he spoke of the creature, the deep respect in his voice, underscored the severity of the threat. This wasn't just a local legend to him. It was a living, breathing entity, a force of nature. We arrived at his cabin just as dusk began to settle over the mountains. The familiar scent of wood smoke and pine welcomed me. The cabin, nestled among the dark trees, looked like a fortress against the encroaching night. After a simple but hearty dinner of stew and cornbread, we sat by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on Silas's weathered face. He pulled out an old, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said, handing it to me. "He was the first in our family to really document what was happening around the pass. He was a tracker, a hunter, knew these woods better than anyone. He started writing things down after the Marrows disappeared." I opened the journal carefully. The handwriting was spidery and faded but legible. The language was old-fashioned, but the content sent chills down my spine. There were sketches of the local flora and fauna, detailed maps of the trails, but also chilling accounts of strange occurrences. October 12, 1935, found another deer torn asunder near the northern ridge. No claw marks I recognize, but the ground was wet with that black ichor, same as the others. The scent like iron and damp earth. It stirs again. March 4, 1941, young Tommy Peterson lost near the pass. His father found his boots, a single small bone carved like a bird. Said the boy was always curious about the tunnel, about the old Marrow place. Warned him repeatedly. The weeper claims another. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. There were rough sketches of the symbols I had seen, drawn with an unsteady hand labeled Marrow ciphers. And there, among the pages, was a detailed drawing of the altar, looking almost exactly as I had seen it, complete with the bone figures. My grandfather had witnessed this. He had seen the same horrors. He tried to understand it, Emily, Silas said, watching me read. Tried to find a way to make sense of it. He believed the Marrows had opened a door, a thin place, and the weeper was drawn to it. Not a monster in the typical sense, he thought, more like a sentinel, a guardian of the threshold. And the black liquid, he believed it was a byproduct of its very presence, a corruption of the earth itself. A sentinel, I repeated, the word resonating with me. It fit the creature's strange, deliberate movements. Its unblinking gaze, its seeming indifference to me until I touched its sacred space. He also theorized about the symbols, Silas continued. He thought some were warnings, ancient protections against whatever the Marrows were dabbling in. Others, he believed, were spells, bindings, to keep the weeper contained or perhaps to control it. To control it, the idea was audacious, terrifying. Could anyone really control something like that? My grandfather thought the Marrows tried and failed. Spectacularly, Silas said, his voice flat. That's why they disappeared. They became victims of their own ambition, and the weeper, once bound, might have turned on its captors. Or perhaps the ritual was designed to feed it, and it simply devoured them. I closed the journal, feeling a profound sense of connection to Silas's grandfather, to his brave, desperate attempts to document the impossible. He was a man who, like me, couldn't let it go. Thank you for sharing this with me, Silas, I said, handing back the journal. It changes things. It gives us a framework. It also tells us how dangerous this is, he countered, carefully putting the journal away. You're going back into the heart of something that killed people for generations. Humans and whatever that thing is, we need to be careful, more careful than you've ever been. The weight of his words settled over me. I nodded, a cold dread twisting in my stomach, but also a fierce determination. I had a chance to understand, to document, to perhaps even prevent future tragedies. I couldn't back down. Sleep that night was a little less plagued by nightmares, perhaps because the information, the context, had given my mind something to latch onto to process the terror. I still saw the glowing green eyes, but this time I also saw the Marrow ciphers, the old journal, Silas's grim, knowing face. The creature was no longer an abstract terror. It was part of a larger, ancient narrative. We woke before dawn, the cabin still dark and quiet. Silas made coffee and a quick breakfast. The air was crisp and cold, filled with the scent of pine and impending adventure. I checked my gear one last time, camera batteries charged, extra lenses packed, powerful headlamp and lantern ready. My hiking pole felt solid in my grasp. Ready? Silas asked, pulling on his heavy jacket. As I'll ever be, I replied, a nervous flutter in my stomach. We left the cabin, the only light coming from our headlamps and the faint glow of the pre-dawn sky. The forest was a symphony of rustling leaves and hooting owls. Silas led the way, his movements fluid and silent, a true woodsman. He moved with an innate understanding of the terrain, navigating the dense undergrowth with ease. We hiked for what felt like hours, following faint deer trails and old, overgrown logging paths. The sun slowly began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, filtering through the dense canopy of trees. The light was beautiful, but it did little to ease the tension building within me. Finally, Silas stopped. He pointed through a thicket of brush. There, he whispered, the northern ridge, the tunnel entrance is just beyond that rockfall. I peered through the trees. In the distance, I could just make out the dark opening, a jagged maw in the side of the mountain. It looked even more imposing from this new angle, framed by ancient, gnarled trees. We were high up on a slope, overlooking the tunnel entrance, giving us a vantage point without being directly in front of it. We'll set up here, Silas said, gesturing to a small, relatively clear area sheltered by some large boulders. It's a good spot. We can see the entrance clearly, but we're hidden, and it gives us a good escape route if needed. We carefully unpacked our gear. I assembled my new camera, attaching the wide-angle lens. Silas pulled out a pair of powerful binoculars and scanned the tunnel entrance. Anything? I whispered, my voice tight. Nothing yet. Looks quiet. Too quiet, maybe, he murmured. No tracks, no signs of recent traffic, human or otherwise, but that doesn't mean anything. This thing moves silently. I began taking photos, first of the surrounding landscape, then zooming in on the tunnel entrance. The light was still dim, but my camera's low-light capabilities were excellent. I captured the texture of the moss-covered rocks, the way the ancient trees seemed to lean in, as if guarding the secret within. We spent the morning in watchful silence, taking turns scanning the entrance with binoculars, listening intently to the sounds of the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My mind played tricks on me, seeing movement in the shadows, hearing faint, guttural sounds on the wind. Around midday, a strange phenomenon occurred. The air, which had been crisp and clear, suddenly grew still and heavy. A faint, almost imperceptible chill permeated the forest, a cold that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. And then the smell, the faint, metallic tang of decay and iron, barely noticeable at first but slowly intensifying, a phantom presence that made my stomach clench. Silas stiffened. It's stirring, he whispered, his voice low and grim. It knows we're here, or something else is. I felt my heart pound against my ribs. My hands, gripping my camera, were clammy with sweat. I zoomed in on the tunnel entrance, my finger hovering over the shutter button. Then, from deep within the tunnel, a sound reached us. A low, guttural murmur. Not words, but those same ancient clicks and whistles I had heard before, the sounds of grinding stone and dry bone. It seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath us, a deep, unsettling hum. It's awake, Silas breathed, his eyes fixed on the entrance. It's aware. I kept my camera steady, trying to capture the eerie, oppressive atmosphere. The The sounds intensified, growing louder, more resonant. It was as if the tunnel itself was speaking, a voice from an ancient, forgotten world. Then I saw it. A faint, sickly green luminescence flickered within the mouth of the tunnel, just like the light from the creature's eyes. It pulsed erratically, casting grotesque shadows on the walls, painting the darkness with an unholy glow. My breath hitched, my finger instinctively pressed the shutter button, capturing the sight. The light grew stronger, closer. And then a shape began to emerge from the blackness. The impossibly tall, unnaturally thin form, its limbs like spindly branches, its head small and tucked into its shoulders, and those two pulsing green lights like eyes burning into the daylight. The Weeper. It moved with its terrifying, fluid lurch, stepping out of the tunnel and into the filtered sunlight. Its mottled gray-black skin seemed to shimmer faintly, still wet, still like something pulled from a swamp. It stood there at the mouth of the tunnel, its head cocked, its green eyes sweeping across the forest as if searching for us. I kept shooting, my camera a barrier between me and the overwhelming terror. Each click of the shutter felt like a defiant act. This was proof. This was real. The creature let out a low, rasping hiss, a sound of warning, of territorial assertion. Its gaze swept over the ridge where we were hidden, its eyes lingering for a moment, as if it sensed our presence, even though we were well concealed. Silas slowly, carefully reached for his rifle, which he had resting beside him. It was an old hunting rifle, well maintained, but I knew from his earlier words that it wouldn't be much use against this thing. It was more for reassurance, for an extreme last resort. But then something even more unsettling happened. A second shape emerged from the tunnel. It was smaller than the first, but still unnaturally thin and elongated. Its skin was also mottled gray-black, and its eyes pulsed with the same sickly green light. It was clearly another one of them, or perhaps a younger one. My blood ran cold, two of them. The sheer impossibility of it, the horrifying implication, stole my breath. The second creature moved differently. Its gait was less deliberate, more agitated. It seemed to be agitated by the sunlight, recoiling slightly, then scurrying forward as if compelled by an unseen force. As it moved further out of the tunnel, into the clearer light, I saw something else. It was carrying something. Clutched in its long, spindly hand was a bundle of rags, small and inert. My camera zoomed in, pushing past the limits of its optical zoom, then digitally enhancing the image. The rags were dark, stained, and from within them, a flash of white. A tiny, delicate hand, a child's hand. My stomach lurched, a wave of nausea, cold and sharp, washed over me. It wasn't just guarding, it wasn't just taking animals, it was taking children. The second creature placed the bundle reverently on the ground just outside the tunnel entrance, next to a newly formed pool of the black, viscous liquid. The first creature, the larger one, turned its head, its glowing eyes fixed on the bundle, then on the smaller creature. It let out another series of deep, guttural clicks, a sound that in its alienness seemed to convey both possessiveness and a horrifying sense of satisfaction. The smaller creature then turned, its glowing green eyes sweeping the forest again, this time with a more focused intensity. It was guarding the offering. Silas made a low, strangled sound beside me. His face was ashen, his knuckles white around the rifle. He had seen it too, the child. My mind reeled. This wasn't just an ancient guardian. This was an active predator involved in something far more horrific than I could have imagined. And the altar, the bone carvings, they weren't just remnants of old rituals. They were part of a continuing, terrifying cycle. The air grew even colder, the metallic smell overpowering. The two creatures stood by the tunnel entrance, silent sentinels over their macabre offering, their green eyes scanning the forest. The larger one looked directly at our position, its head cocked as if it had pinpointed us. "Silas," I whispered, my voice trembling, "it sees us. They both see us." He nodded slowly, his gaze locked on the creatures. "We need to get out of here. Now, slowly, no sudden movements." The words were barely out of his mouth when the larger creature let out a piercing shriek, a sound that scraped against my eardrums, far louder and more enraged than anything I had heard before. Its spindly arm shot out, pointing directly at our hiding spot. The smaller creature immediately echoed the shriek, its body tensing, its eyes burning with malevolent fury. They were coming for us. "Run, Emily, run!" Silas shouted, pushing me forward, already scrambling to his feet. Adrenaline surged through me, replacing the nausea with a burning terror. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, scrambling down the rocky slope, my new hiking pole thudding against the uneven ground. Silas was right behind me, his heavy boots crunching on the loose shale, a grunt escaping him with every powerful stride. The piercing shriek of the larger weeper tore through the air, followed by the higher, more frantic cry of the smaller one. They were close, too close. I didn't look back. My lungs burned, my stitched shoulder protested with every jarring impact, but the fear was a white-hot current overriding all pain. I scrambled, slid, and half fell down the steep, forested incline, my only thought to put distance between us and that unimaginable horror. Branches whipped at my face, roots tripped my feet, but I kept going, driven by the image of that tiny, lifeless hand. A child. It wasn't just guarding, it was taking. Silas's hand clamped onto my arm, pulling me sharply to the right. "This way, Old Deer Trail keeps us off the main path," he shouted, his voice rough with exertion. We veered off the direct descent, plunging into denser undergrowth. The forest floor here was softer, a thick carpet of pine needles and decaying leaves muffling our footsteps. But the silence, once a comfort, was now terrifying. It meant the creatures could be just as silent, just as unseen. The raspy clicks and whistles, accompanied by the guttural hum, began again, emanating from behind us, closer now. They were faster than I remembered, or perhaps they were just no longer being cautious. The shrill cries indicated their growing frustration, or perhaps their hunger. "Headlamps off," Silas commanded, his voice urgent. "Stay low, we're breaking line of sight." I fumbled with my tactical headlamp, clicking it off. Darkness, thick and immediate, enveloped us. My eyes struggled to adjust, the towering trees blurring into indistinct shadows. Silas, however, moved with an almost preternatural ease, his hand on my back, guiding me, pushing me through the gloom. He was a phantom in his own woods, relying on instinct and generations of embedded knowledge. We plunged into a thicket of rhododendrons, their dense, waxy leaves providing a momentary screen. I could hear their movements now, the wet squelch of their feet on the damp earth, the eerie click-hiss growing louder. They were moving around the rhododendron bush, trying to flank us. "Hold still," Silas hissed, pulling me down behind a fallen log. We crouched, barely breathing, pressing ourselves against the cool, rough bark. Through a gap in the foliage, I saw them. The two monstrous forms, illuminated by their own sickly green eyes, moved like specters through the trees. The larger one, its head still cocked, sniffed the air, its movements deliberate, almost intelligent. The smaller one, more erratic, darted to and fro, its long, spindly limbs a blur. They passed within 20 feet of us, their glowing eyes sweeping over our hiding spot, missing us by inches. The metallic tang of decay was overwhelming, burning my nostrils. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself invisible. They continued past, their sounds fading slightly as they followed what they perceived to be our original path. "They're tracking by scent and sound," Silas whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "They think we went straight down the slope. Good, we'll circle back." We waited, huddled behind the log, until the sounds were almost inaudible. Then Silas moved, rising slowly, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. "Come on, we need to put more ground between us." We moved again, but this time Silas led us on a circuitous route, winding through dense patches of forest, along the banks of a trickling stream and over rocky outcrops. He was using the terrain to his advantage, breaking our scent trail, avoiding open areas where we could be easily spotted. He moved with the quiet stealth of a seasoned hunter, and I tried my best to emulate him, placing my feet carefully, minimizing noise. The hike was grueling. My shoulder ached, my legs burned, and my mind was a chaotic mess of fear and adrenaline. Every shadow seemed to hold the twin green lights, every rustle of leaves was a creature's approach. The image of the child's hand was burned into my memory, a horrifying beacon in the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, Silas finally stopped, pressing himself against a massive old-growth cedar. "We're far enough," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They won't find us here, not tonight." I collapsed against the tree trunk, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and lingering terror. The air here was cooler, cleaner, without the oppressive metallic scent. We were deep in the woods, the sounds of the creatures finally gone. "Are you okay, Emily?" Silas asked, his voice softer now. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my ragged breathing. The darkness behind my eyelids was still filled with glowing green eyes and spindly limbs. "That child, Silas," I finally managed to whisper, the words tasting like ash. "It was a child." He nodded, his face grim in the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. I saw, it's happened before. The old stories, sometimes it takes the young, the innocent. They say their essence is purer, stronger, for whatever foul purpose it serves. But two of them, I breathed, the realization still sending a shockwave through me. You never mentioned there could be two. I never saw two before, Silas admitted, his brow furrowed. My grandfather's journal mentions only one, a singular entity, but the Marrows, if they were dabbling in creation or multiplication, or if the guardian aspect meant there could be more than one to guard different thresholds, I don't know, Emily. This changes things drastically. The thought that there could be more, that these creatures weren't unique, that they might even be multiplying, was profoundly disturbing. It escalated the threat from a localized horror to something potentially far more widespread. "What do we do now?" I asked, looking up at him, feeling utterly lost. "We can't go back to the tunnel, and we can't just let them take children." Silas sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "First, we get back to my cabin. It's still a long trek, and we'll have to be careful. They might be trying to circle back to the tunnel." Then we figure out a next step. But one thing is for sure, this isn't just about documenting anymore. This is about stopping it if we can. Stopping it, the words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken danger. How could two ordinary people stop something ancient, supernatural, and now potentially multiplying? And the horrifying implications of that child. It transformed the abstract terror into a very real, very human tragedy. We rested for a while, catching our breath, trying to regain some semblance of calm. The forest slowly came alive with its natural night sounds, a stark contrast to the unnatural silence that had preceded the creatures. Silas kept his rifle close, his eyes scanning the darkness, ever vigilant. "We need to get moving before first light," he finally said. "It's a long way back, and we want to be well away from here when they start moving again in the morning. They'll be looking for us." The trek back to Silas's cabin was a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. We moved through the pre-dawn hours, carefully navigating the dense forest, avoiding open clearings, and constantly listening for any sounds of pursuit. Silas's knowledge of the land was our only shield, his quiet determination our only guide. I clung to my hiking pole, my camera bag clutched tightly, the images of what I had seen still vivid in my mind. By the time we reached the cabin, the first faint light of dawn was painting the eastern sky. We were both covered in mud, scratches, and exhaustion. The cabin, usually a welcome sight, now felt like a fragile bastion against an encroaching darkness. "First things first," Silas said, unlocking the door and gesturing me inside. "Hot coffee, something to eat, then we talk." The normalcy of coffee and warm food was a strange balm, a temporary anchor in the maelstrom of unreality. But the silence between us was heavy, filled with the unspoken horror of what we had witnessed. The child. After we had both eaten and the initial exhaustion had receded slightly, we sat by the crackling fire, the flames doing little to warm the chill in my bones. "So," Silas began, his voice low and serious, "the situation has changed. It's not just a single guardian entity anymore, it's two, and they're taking children. That's a line we can't let them cross." "But how do we fight them, Silas?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Your rifle wouldn't stop them. They're not flesh and blood as we know it." He nodded, running a hand over his tired face. "No, not in the way a bullet would. My grandfather, he had theories. He believed they were tied to the earth, to the energies of this place, and that the Marrow's rituals were designed to amplify that connection or perhaps to draw sustenance from it, and that altar its key." "The altar was covered in those symbols," I said, remembering, "and the bone figures and the black liquid." "Exactly," Silas confirmed. "The Marrows, they were dabblers. They tried to tap into forces they didn't understand. My grandfather believed some of those symbols were meant to bind, to control, others to channel energy, and the offerings, they weren't just sacrifices. He thought they were a way to feed it, to strengthen its connection to this realm. The black liquid, it's a manifestation of that corruption, the bleeding of its essence into our world." "So if we destroy the altar," I ventured, a spark of hope flickering, "would that weaken them or sever their connection?" Silas paused, considering. "It's a possibility. It might break whatever spell the Marrows wove. It might disrupt their hold. But we don't know what might happen. It could make them weaker, or it could enrage them further, release them from some unseen binding. We'd be walking into the unknown." "But we have to try," I insisted, the image of the child still searing in my mind. "We can't just let this continue. We have to do something." I agree, Silas said, a determined glint in his weary eyes. But we need a plan, a proper plan, and we need to go back to the tunnel. And this time we need to be prepared for more than just observation. What kind of preparation? I asked. If the creatures are tied to this place, to that tunnel, to those symbols, then we need something that can disrupt that connection, he explained. My grandfather researched it after the Marrows. He believed certain ancient Native American rituals, particularly those involving purification and protection, could potentially ward off or weaken such entities. He even experimented with some of them himself in a small way. What kind of rituals? Sage, certain herbs, salt, and sound, bells, drums, things meant to cleanse, to repel negative energies, to create a barrier, Silas elaborated. He believed that while bullets couldn't harm it, spiritual or elemental forces might. He left me some notes, some instructions. But it's risky, Emily. We'd be operating on belief, on ancient magic, not on science. At this point, I'm willing to try anything, Silas, I said, my voice firm. We saw what they did. Science can't explain them, so maybe science can't stop them. He nodded. All right, first we need more information. We need to go over my grandfather's journal again carefully. Look for any specific details about disrupting the Marrow rituals or weakening the Weeper. Then we gather the necessary items. I have some sage, some dried herbs, things like that left over from my grandfather, but we might need more. What about a diversion? I suggested. If we're going to destroy the altar, we need to draw them away from the entrance or at least keep them distracted. 2 of them, they'll be watching. Silas considered this. A diversion would be good. Loud noises, something to draw their attention. We could set up a controlled fire, something like that, a distance away to pull them from the tunnel. But they're cunning. They might sense a trap. What if we use light? I asked, remembering the creature's slight recoil from the sunlight. My tactical headlamp is powerful, and I have that camping lantern. If they're creatures of shadow, maybe intense light disorients them. It's a possibility, Silas mused. Light can certainly be a deterrent, especially against things that prefer the dark. My grandfather noted that the Weeper was less active in full daylight, but total darkness is their domain. Flashlights are good, but sustained, blinding light might do more. We'll add that to the plan. Over the next 2 days, we meticulously planned our counteroffensive. We pored over Silas's grandfather's journal, deciphering his faded notes and cryptic entries. He had indeed detailed various protective and cleansing rituals, drawing from local indigenous practices and his own observations. There were mentions of smoke of the sacred plant to purify, salt from the ancient sea to bind, and sound of the forest to awaken slumbering spirits of protection. Silas had some of the necessary items: bundles of dried white sage, a small bag of rock salt, and a collection of smooth river stones. We spent a day harvesting specific herbs and barks from the surrounding forest, following his grandfather's detailed sketches. Some were known for their strong scents, others for their symbolic protective qualities. He even showed me how to make a rudimentary rattle from dried gourds and pebbles, intended to create a jarring, rhythmic sound. My grandfather believed the Weeper was drawn to negative energy, to fear, to places where the veil between worlds was thin, Silas explained as we worked. He thought the Marrow's rituals were designed to thin that veil even further, to keep it open. If we can thicken it, reinforce the boundaries that might weaken its presence, make it harder for it to manifest, or even for the other one to grow stronger. The idea of thickening the veil intrigued me. It wasn't about killing the creature, but about restoring a natural balance, closing a door that should have remained shut. While Silas focused on the spiritual aspects, I focused on the practical. My new camera was prepped, batteries fully charged. I packed extra memory cards, all my powerful lights, headlamp, camping lantern, a smaller backup flashlight. I ensured my sturdy hiking pole was easily accessible. I also packed a small bag of emergency rations, water, and my first aid kit. This was no longer just a research trip, it was a mission. We need a strong light source for the diversion, I told Silas. Something intense that can be left running. My lantern is good, but if we need to drop it and run. Silas thought for a moment. I have an old miner's lamp, runs on a small generator. It's heavy, but it puts out a hell of a beam. We could rig it to run for a while, position it away from the tunnel, but still visible. That might draw them. The plan began to solidify. One approach, we would approach the tunnel again from the northern ridge, using our previous vantage point. This would allow us to observe any new activity without immediately alerting the creatures. 2. Diversion. Once we confirmed their presence, we would set up the miner's lamp a few hundred yards away from the tunnel entrance on the opposite side of the clearing. It would be rigged to turn on after a delay, creating a powerful, sustained light source to draw the creature's attention. 3. Infiltration. While the weepers were distracted by the light, we would quickly descend to the tunnel entrance and enter it. 4. Altar destruction and cleansing. Inside, we would destroy the altar, scatter the protective salt, burn the sage and herbs, and use the ritualistic sounds to create a cleansing barrier, effectively closing the door the Marrows had opened. 5. Escape. Once the ritual was complete, we would retreat as fast as possible, using our powerful handheld lights to disorient any pursuing creatures and making our way back to the cabin. The inherent risks were immense. Going into the tunnel, even with a plan, was terrifying. We didn't know how the creatures would react to the ritual or to the destruction of their sacred space. We didn't know if the diversion would work, and we didn't know how many of them were truly inside. The night before our planned operation, sleep was elusive. I lay awake, staring at the cabin's ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the old wood settling. My mind raced, replaying every horrifying detail, every possible scenario. I knew this was a fool's errand, a desperate gamble, but the alternative, doing nothing, was unthinkable. When dawn broke, a cold, gray light filtered through the window. The air was heavy, pregnant with the promise of rain. Silas and I ate breakfast in silence, the unspoken tension thick between us. Our gear was packed, our resolve grim. "Remember the escape routes," Silas reminded me, his voice low. "If anything goes wrong, we scatter. Meet back at the cabin if you can. If not, head directly for the main road and keep going until you find help. Don't stop for anything." I nodded, my throat dry. "And you, Silas?" "I'll do the same," he replied, giving me a rare, sad smile. "We go in together, Emily. We get out together, but if it comes down to it, save yourself." We drove Silas's truck as far as the old logging trail, then parked it deep in a thicket, covering it with camouflage netting. From there, we proceeded on foot, moving through the dense forest, making our way back to the northern ridge. The air was still, heavy with a pre-storm calm. As we reached our previous vantage point, Silas scanned the tunnel entrance with his binoculars. "Still quiet," he murmured. "No signs of movement. Either they're deep inside or they've moved on." "Or they're waiting," I whispered, my heart pounding. We set up our observation post and I began taking photographs, documenting the scene. The entrance still looked the same, dark and inviting, yet utterly menacing. There were no new visible changes from our position. Silas carefully unwrapped the miner's lamp. It was a bulky, heavy contraption with a powerful halogen bulb. He set it up on a makeshift tripod, aiming it towards the tunnel entrance, then connected it to a small, battery-powered timer he had jury-rigged. "I'll set it for 15 minutes, he explained. "That should give us enough time to get into position, confirm the tunnel is clear, and make our move." He carried the lamp to its designated spot about 200 yards from the tunnel entrance on the opposite side of the clearing. I watched him move through the trees, a lone, determined figure. He returned a few minutes later, his face set. "Right," he said, handing me a small leather pouch. "This contains the sage and herbs. Once inside, light them. The smoke is vital, and the salt to scatter it around the base of the altar. Create a circle, and the rattle, keep it going. The sound disrupts their frequencies." He handed me a small, sharp hatchet. "For the altar, it needs to be thoroughly destroyed. Break it apart. Don't leave any piece intact, and be quick." My hand trembled as I took the hatchet. It felt shockingly real, an actual weapon for a tangible, horrific task. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "When do we start the timer?" Silas checked his watch. "Now, let's move. We need to be ready." He activated the timer on the lamp. We started our descent, moving quickly but carefully down the slope, our eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance. The tension was excruciating. Every step felt like a gamble. We reached the edge of the clearing, hidden behind a thick stand of ferns about 50 yards from the tunnel mouth. The entrance was still dark, silent. The smell of damp earth was strong, but the metallic tang of decay was absent. They weren't there, not yet. "Wait for the light," Silas whispered, gripping his rifle. "Once it's on, we move fast." The 15 minutes felt like an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs, my palms were slick with sweat. I imagined the creatures deep within, perhaps sleeping, perhaps sensing our presence, stirring from their ancient slumber. Then, with a sudden, blinding flash, the miner's lamp flickered to life. Its powerful beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the clearing with an artificial daylight. It was positioned perfectly, drawing the eye away from the tunnel towards the source of the light. Silence. Then, from deep within the tunnel, a low, guttural growl echoed. It was a sound of annoyance, of disturbance. "Go," Silas hissed, pulling me forward. We sprinted across the clearing, our boots crunching on the gravel, a flurry of motion towards the dark maw. My heart was in my throat, every instinct screaming at me to run the other way. We reached the entrance. The air inside was immediately colder, heavier. The familiar, sickening, metallic tang of decay hit me, stronger than ever. The tunnel walls loomed, dark and forbidding. "Headlamps on," Silas commanded. I clicked my headlamp on, its powerful beam piercing the gloom. Silas did the same. We were inside. The first section of the tunnel was empty. My car, which had been towed away, was no longer there, and the viscous smear I had seen before had dried and faded, but the disturbed stones remained. We moved quickly, our lights sweeping the walls, searching for any sign of the creatures. The clicks and whistles started again, deeper inside the tunnel, accompanied by the wet squelch of movement. They were stirring. The diversion was working, but they were definitely agitated. "Move, we don't have much time," Silas urged, pushing me forward. We reached the side passage. My headlamp beam, combined with Silas's, cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the horrifying chamber. The altar was still there, crude and menacing, but it wasn't empty. On top of the stones, amidst the bone figures and dried black residue, was a new offering. A fresh, small bundle of rags just like the one the smaller creature had carried. My stomach lurched. The child, its scent, coppery and sweet, was sickeningly strong. And then I saw something else. On the wall above the altar, the marrow ciphers were freshly etched, the lines deeper, the concentric circles more vibrant, as if recently worked upon, and beneath them a new symbol, a stylized, twisted representation of a crawling insect with multiple limbs. It pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, with a dark, sickly energy. "Someone has been here," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Recently, actively." "The cult," Silas breathed, his face grim. "They're still here, they're still active." The implication was terrifying. Not just ancient residue, but a living, breathing group continuing these abominable practices. It meant the threat wasn't just monstrous, it was human. "Emily, the altar, quick," Silas urged, already drawing a lighter from his pocket. I swallowed, forcing myself to move. I dropped my camera bag, then pulled out the leather pouch. With trembling hands, I unwrapped a bundle of dried sage and herbs. Silas lit them, and a thick plume of fragrant, cleansing smoke immediately billowed into the air, pushing back against the metallic stench. I grabbed the rock salt, scattering it around the base of the altar, creating a protective circle. My hands shook, but I focused on the task, on the belief that this could work, that it could somehow disrupt the horror. Then I picked up the hatchet. It felt heavy, cold in my hand. I aimed for the crudest stone, the one at the center of the altar, where the black liquid pooled. I brought the hatchet down with all my strength. Crack! The stone splintered, sending fragments skittering across the floor. A wave of dark energy seemed to ripple from the altar, pushing against me, a cold, malevolent force that made my teeth ache. The air grew impossibly cold. From the tunnel beyond, the weepers shrieked. A sound of absolute fury, of raw, ancient rage. They had stopped chasing the light. They knew we were here. They knew what we were doing. "Hurry, Emily, they're coming!" Silas yelled, already rattling the gourd, its rhythmic sound jarring and sharp, filling the chamber. He held the smoking sage high, chanting something in a low, guttural language I didn't understand. A rhythmic, protective incantation. I swung the hatchet again and again, striking the altar stones with desperate force. Crack, crunch, the bones, brittle and ancient, shattered under the impact. The black liquid began to seep out, not just from the stone, but from the very ground beneath, pooling, spreading. It pulsed, thicker and darker than before, almost alive. As I worked, I caught a glimpse of the child's bundle. My resolve hardened. This had to stop. The shriek of the weepers grew louder, closer. I heard the wet squelch of their feet in the main tunnel, approaching the side passage. Their green eyes flickered, casting eerie reflections on the walls. "The symbols, Emily, the new one," Silas cried, pointing to the crawling insect symbol. "Destroy it, it's fresh." I turned, my heart pounding. The hatchet felt like an extension of my arm. I swung it, striking the wall where the symbol was etched. The stone was hard, but the hatchet bit deep. I hacked at it, scraping, gouging, trying to erase the foul marking. As the hatchet chipped away at the symbol, the sickly green glow emanating from the creature's eyes intensified, casting the chamber in a hellish light. The metallic scent became overpowering, mixed with a foul, acrid smell like burning flesh and sulfur. The air itself seemed to crackle with dark energy. A shadow fell over the entrance to the side passage. Then the first creature appeared, the larger one, its glowing green eyes fixed on me on the hatchet on the desecrated altar. Its shriek was a physical blow vibrating through my very bones. "Run, Emily, run now," Silas roared, pushing me. He thrust a bundle of smoking sage into my hand, still rattling the gourd, shouting the ancient words, trying to hold the creature back. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my camera bag, clutching it like a lifeline, and bolted out of the chamber, turning down the main tunnel, my headlamp beam cutting a desperate path through the darkness. The creature's shriek echoed behind me, followed by a sickening crunch, a sound of stone being torn apart. It was destroying what was left of the altar, or perhaps it was attacking Silas. "Silas," I screamed, turning back for a split second. He was there, standing defiantly at the entrance to the chamber, still rattling the gourd, still chanting. But the creature was lunging. Its spindly arm, tipped with bone-like claws, reached for him. He discharged his rifle, the roar deafening in the enclosed space, but the bullet seemed to glance off the creature's mottled hide, doing nothing but enraging it further. "Go, Emily, go," he yelled, his voice strained. "Get out." I couldn't leave him, but then I saw the smaller creature darting past the larger one, moving with terrifying speed, coming for me. Its eyes burned with a malevolent green, reflecting off the tunnel walls. No choice, I turned and ran, the smoke from the sage I still clutched swirling around me. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, the screams of the creatures, the crackle of energy, and Silas's defiant shouts echoing behind me. My headlamp beam danced wildly in front of me as I pounded through the main tunnel. The exit, a small, faint circle of gray light, seemed impossibly far away. My lungs burned, my legs were screaming, but the image of the child and the sound of Silas's last cry fueled me. I burst out of the tunnel, gasping for air, into the gray, pre-rain light of the morning. The miner's lamp was still blazing, its powerful beam cutting across the clearing, but it was no longer a diversion. It was a beacon, drawing all attention. I didn't look back, I ran. I scrambled across the gravel, heading towards the edge of the clearing, towards the dense forest where our escape route lay. Behind me, from the tunnel entrance, a cacophony of shrieks and growls erupted. And then, a sound that froze my blood, the wet squelch of many feet moving with impossible speed across the gravel. They were both out, and they were coming for me. I plunged into the trees, the sage smoke still swirling around me, trying to navigate the familiar terrain that Silas had taught me. I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth behind me, their enraged cries echoing through the silent forest. The smaller creature was faster, closer. I could hear its raspy breathing, the clicking of its bone-like claws. I ran until my vision blurred, until my legs felt like lead. The forest became a maze of shadows and snapping branches. My mind raced, desperate for an idea, any idea. My hand still clutched the smoking sage. I remembered Silas's words, "The smoke is vital," and my own lights, sustained, blinding light might do more. I glanced back, catching a terrifying glimpse of the smaller weeper, its green eyes blazing just a few yards behind me. The larger one was close behind, its roars vibrating through the ground. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I fumbled with the camping lantern, switching it onto its brightest setting. Its powerful beam instantly cut through the gloom, creating a dazzling circle of light around me. The smaller weeper shrieked, recoiling sharply, its spindly arms coming up to shield its eyes. It stumbled, giving me a precious few seconds. I didn't stop. I threw the smoking sage over my shoulder, a fragrant cloud erupting behind me, hoping it would disorient them further. Then I kept running, the powerful lantern held high, its beams slicing through the forest. I was making for the old logging trail, the path Silas had planned for our retreat. If I could just make it to the truck. But the creatures were relentless. The larger one, seemingly less affected by the light or recovering faster, roared and continued its pursuit. The smaller one, though momentarily stunned, was quickly regaining its footing. I heard the rapid thud of something heavy hitting the ground behind me. Thud, thud, thud. They were not running on two legs anymore. They were moving on all fours, their speed terrifying, unnatural. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I pushed harder, my breath ragged, my side stitching with pain. I could feel their presence, a chilling proximity that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Then from ahead a sound, not the creatures, a different sound. A vehicle, the faint rumble of an engine. My heart leaped. The truck, Silas's truck, had he made it? Was he coming for me? Silas, I screamed, hoping, praying he was there. The engine sound grew louder, closer. I pushed through a final thicket of brambles, my clothes snagging, my skin tearing. And then I saw it, not Silas's truck. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck, dark green, covered in mud. It was parked haphazardly on the logging trail, its engine idling. The driver's side door was open, and a figure was slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. And standing next to the truck, two more figures, human figures, dressed in dark, hooded cloaks, their faces obscured by shadow. They turned as I burst out of the trees, illuminated by my powerful lantern. Their eyes, visible just barely in the shadow of their hoods, glinted with an unsettling, predatory intelligence. One of them raised a hand, in its grip a long, curved ceremonial knife. Its blade glinted dully. "You should not have returned," a voice, low and raspy, emerged from beneath the hood. "You have disturbed what is not yours to disturb." Behind me, the weepers burst out of the trees, their green eyes burning, their shrieks filling the air. They paused, momentarily confused, caught between their pursuit of me and the presence of the cloaked figures. I was trapped between the ancient, inhuman monsters and these new, horrifyingly human ones. The cloaked figure took a step towards me, the knife held aloft. "The offerings must be completed, the guardian appeased, and you have interrupted the cycle." The words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. These weren't just fanatics, they were complicit in the horror, actively enabling the creatures that took children. The larger weeper, with a guttural roar, seemed to ignore the cultists for a moment, its burning green eyes fixed solely on me. It surged forward, its spindly limbs blurring, a terrifying, unnatural speed. The smaller one, still reeling from my lantern's light, let out a frustrated hiss but moved to follow its larger counterpart, circling wide as if to flank me. No, one of the cloaked figures barked, stepping directly into the path of the larger weeper, raising a hand. The creature faltered, its roar subsiding to a low, frustrated growl. It eyed the cultist with a strange mixture of deference and aggression, its head cocked, its green gaze flickering between the human and me. The other cultist, the one with the knife, lunged. "She has interfered," he hissed, his voice full of venom. The glint of the blade caught the gray light as he moved, a dark blur against the backdrop of the forest. I reacted instinctively, a surge of pure survival instinct overriding logic. I swung my hiking pole not at the cultist, but at the lantern I still held. The impact was jarring, the powerful beam swinging wildly, dazzling the cultist for a split second. Then, still holding the pole, I pivoted, slamming the heavy camera bag I still clutched into his gut. He grunted, stumbling back, the knife clattering on the gravel. This momentary distraction was all I needed. The weepers, momentarily caught between the cultists and me, seemed to pause, their ancient, alien intelligence trying to process the sudden chaos. I didn't wait. I bolted past the struggling cultist, past the idling pickup truck, and plunged into the dense woods on the other side of the logging trail. "Stop her!" the first cultist roared, his voice filled with urgency to both the weepers and his comrade. Behind me, I heard a sickening thud as the cultist with the knife fell, likely from the impact of my camera bag or perhaps from the large weeper finally losing its patience. The creature let out an enraged shriek, now focused again on me, abandoning any pretense of restraint towards the humans. The wet squelch of its feet on the damp earth grew louder, accompanied by the frantic clicks and hisses of the smaller one. I ran blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, the powerful lantern still clutched in my hand, its beam bouncing erratically, illuminating fleeting glimpses of trees and tangled roots. My breath hitched, my lungs burned, and every muscle screamed in protest. The forest was a blur of panic and pain. I heard the cultists' shouts now, joining the chorus of the weeper's pursuit. "After her, don't let her escape." This was worse, far worse. I was being hunted by three distinct entities, two ancient, otherworldly horrors and two utterly human, yet equally terrifying fanatics. My mind raced, frantically searching for an escape, a hidden path, anything. Silas, where was Silas? Had he made it out? The image of him standing defiant in the tunnel entrance, facing the creature, haunted me. My feet slipped on a patch of wet moss, and I stumbled, falling hard. The lantern flew from my grasp, rolling several feet away, its beam now pointing into the sky, creating an ethereal glow through the canopy. Pain lanced through my already protesting shoulder, and I gasped. Before I could even push myself up, a shadow fell over me, the smaller weeper. Its green eyes, burning with malevolent fury, stared down at me. Its spindly, bone-like hand, tipped with terrifying claws, reached out not to strike, but to grab, to take. A primal scream tore from my throat. I kicked out with all my might, catching its elongated shin. The creature recoiled with a surprised hiss, its grip faltering for a split second. That was all I needed. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder, and lunged for the fallen lantern. My fingers wrapped around it, and I swung it back, aiming the blinding beam directly into the smaller weeper's eyes. It shrieked, a piercing sound of pure agony, flailing its arms, stumbling back into the trees. The light seemed to burn it, causing it genuine distress. But the larger weeper was already there, its vast shadow engulfing me. It let out a guttural roar, ignoring the light, its green eyes fixed on me with terrifying intensity. It was faster, stronger, and seemingly less affected by the light. Just as its massive, clawed hand reached for me, a sudden, blinding flash erupted from the direction of the logging trail. It wasn't my lantern. It was an explosion. Boom! The sound was deafening, tearing through the forest, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. A fireball erupted into the sky, followed by a shower of debris and thick black smoke. The cultists' pickup truck had just exploded. The larger Weeper, momentarily startled, stumbled back, its head whipping towards the source of the blast. The smaller one, still disoriented by my lantern, let out another hiss of confusion. I didn't waste a second. I broke free, fueled by a renewed surge of adrenaline, and plunged deeper into the forest, away from the explosion, away from the Weepers, away from the cultists, whatever had caused that blast. The forest was a blur. The explosion had certainly disoriented the creatures, giving me a head start, but I knew it wouldn't last. They would recover, and they would come for me. The question was who or what had caused the explosion. Had Silas made it out? Was this his doing, or was there another player in this horrifying game? I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed, gasping for air, behind a thick curtain of ferns. My body ached in 100 places, my lungs burned, and the stench of smoke and fear filled my nostrils. I risked a glance back. No green eyes, no cultists, just the lingering echoes of the blast and the eerie, ringing silence that followed. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, trying to calm my ragged breathing, forcing my mind to process the chaos. The cultists, the Weepers, the child, the altar, Silas, the explosion, it was all too much. Finally, after several minutes, I pushed myself up, slowly, painfully. My shoulder throbbed. I still clutched the camping lantern, its beam still strong. My camera bag, miraculously, was still slung across my body, its contents hopefully intact. I needed to find Silas. That was my first, most urgent thought. He was either dead, trapped, or he was the one who had caused that explosion. My heart clenched at the thought of him being gone. He was my guide, my protector, my only link to understanding this ancient horror. I started moving again, slower this time, my senses heightened. I used the lantern sparingly, trying to preserve its battery, relying mostly on the faint ambient light filtering through the dense canopy. I moved with a new purpose, a grim determination replacing the raw panic. I had to find answers. I had to find Silas. I circled wide, trying to avoid the clearing and the main logging trail where the explosion had occurred. I needed to get back to Silas's cabin, our designated rendezvous point. It was a long, arduous trek, especially alone, injured, and hunted. As I navigated the familiar yet terrifying woods, I couldn't shake the image of the cultists. Their hooded figures, their predatory eyes, their willingness to allow the Weepers to take children. They were truly evil, a human evil intertwined with the ancient, monstrous one, and they knew about me. They knew I had disturbed what was not theirs to disturb. The explosion still bothered me. It was too precise to be accidental. If Silas had done it, how had he managed it? And where was he now? If he hadn't, then who? Hours passed. The sky grew darker, the promise of rain finally delivering on its threat. A cold, steady drizzle began to fall, turning the forest floor into a slick, muddy mess. The sounds of the woods, usually a comfort, now felt eerie, every rustle, every drop of rain, a potential threat. I was utterly exhausted, physically and emotionally. My mind was a jumble of fear, guilt, and determination. I blamed myself for Silas's likely fate. I had pushed him into this, had insisted on going back. If he was gone, it was on me. Finally, just as true night descended, I saw it through the driving rain, the faint, warm glow of a lamp through the window of Silas's cabin. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. He was there. He had made it. I stumbled out of the trees, soaked to the bone, mud-streaked and utterly spent. My hand went to the cabin door, but then I hesitated. What if it wasn't Silas? What if the cultists had followed me or were already there, waiting? Silas, I called out, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper against the drumming rain. Silence, then the latch clicked. The door opened slowly. Silas stood there, his face haggard, streaked with dirt and what looked like a dried cut on his temple. His clothes were torn, his rifle still clutched in his hand, but he was alive. "Emily," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with relief, quickly pulling me inside. He slammed the door shut, locking it with a heavy thud, and leaned against it, breathing heavily. I collapsed onto the floor, tears of exhaustion and relief finally escaping. "Silas, you're alive. I thought they got you." He knelt beside me, his hand checking my shoulder, his gaze worried. "I'm fine, just a few scrapes. What about you? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," I managed despite the throbbing pain. "My shoulder, it's fine, but what happened? The explosion, the cultists." He nodded, his face grim. "The cultists, they were waiting. They must have been watching the tunnel. When I heard them coming, after the altar, I rigged a few things." He gestured vaguely towards a shelf. "Some old dynamite my grandfather kept for stump removal. Never thought I'd use it like that. I tossed it under their truck just as they were converging on you, made enough noise to give you a chance." "So you saved me," I said, a profound gratitude washing over me. Again. He shook his head. "We saved each other. You broke the altar, Emily. You bought us time, and you drew the creature's attention away from me. I thought they had you when you broke for the woods." "There were two cultists on the trail," I explained, remembering the horrifying ambush. "Hooded, they knew about us, about what we were doing. They said I disturbed something." Silas nodded grimly. "I figured. They've been here for a long time, quiet in the shadows, but active. My grandfather knew about them too. The Keepers of the Veil, he called them. They believe the Weeper is a sacred guardian, and the Marrow's rituals were a necessary part of its existence. They actively support it, feed it, lure new victims, the child they were involved." The realization hit me with renewed force. This wasn't just some rogue cult. This was an organized group, rooted in the very fabric of this place, perpetuating the horror. "They were going to let the Weeper take me," I whispered, remembering the knife. "They called it an offering." "Aye," Silas confirmed, his eyes hardening. "They're fanatics, believers in a dark pact. They think they're protecting this place, protecting the Weeper, ensuring its cycle continues. They've probably been responsible for many of the disappearances over the years, the ones not directly attributed to the Weeper." "So the ritual, the symbols, they're still practicing it?" I asked. "They are," Silas confirmed. "They etched new symbols, continued the cycle. They believe the Weeper is a sacred part of this land and that it must be appeased, fed. They are the true horror, Emily, humans willingly participating in such vile acts." "Did the altar, did it do anything?" I asked, a desperate hope in my voice. did destroying it make a difference? Silas paused, rubbing his chin. It's hard to say. The creatures were certainly enraged, more so than I've ever seen. The smaller one seemed disoriented by your light, but the larger one, it was pure fury. But the altar is broken. The symbols are defaced. The connection is, at least for now, disrupted. But the veil is still thin, Emily. And those cultists, they'll try to repair it or build a new one. Then we have to stop them, I declared, a new resolve hardening within me. We can't let them continue, not after seeing that child. Silas looked at me, his gaze assessing. I agree, but this is no longer about observation or documenting. This is war, Emily, and we are vastly outnumbered. They have an entire organization steeped in these woods, hidden in plain sight, and they have the Weepers on their side. Then we need help, I said, thinking aloud. We need to go to the authorities, show them the evidence, the photographs, the journal. This isn't just a local legend anymore. It's an active cult involved in human sacrifice, and they're controlling a supernatural entity. Silas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've tried, Emily. Years ago, they laughed me out of the sheriff's office. They called me a madman, told me to stop spreading fairy tales. Without irrefutable proof, something they can't deny, they won't believe us. And even then, how do you explain a creature like the Weeper to them? They'll think we're crazy or part of the cult ourselves. But I have the photos, Silas, I insisted, pulling my camera bag close. I captured everything. The altar, the new offerings, the new symbols, and the Weepers themselves, clear as day. This is concrete evidence. Let's hope so, Silas said, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Let's pray it's enough, but we have to consider they won't. And if they don't, what then? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. What if the authorities dismissed us? What if the cultists were too entrenched, too powerful, too well hidden? What if they retaliated? We spent the rest of the night planning not just our next move, but our survival. We secured the cabin, reinforcing doors and windows as best we could. Silas cleaned his rifle, checked his traps, and set up a makeshift alarm system around the perimeter, tripped lines with bells, crude but effective. I uploaded the photographs from my camera to my laptop, reviewing them with a critical eye. They were stunningly clear, horrifyingly real. The altar, the bone figures, the black liquid, the fresh bundle of rags, the newly etched symbols, and then the Weepers themselves. 2 of them, their green eyes burning, their spindly forms emerging from the tunnel. Even the moment the smaller one recoiled from my light, it was all there, undeniable. This is it, Silas, I said, showing him the images. This is everything. They can't ignore this. He stared at the screen, his face a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. No, they can't. Not if they look at it with open eyes, but we still need to be careful. If the cultists know we have this, they'll come for it, and for us. We go to the sheriff first thing in the morning, I declared, my voice firm. We show him everything, we tell him everything, and we demand action. The next morning, after a restless night filled with nightmares and anxious planning, we drove Silas's truck, still camouflaged but now sporting a few new dents and scratches from the explosion, down the mountain. The drive was tense, our eyes constantly scanning the tree lines, looking for any sign of pursuit. The air was still thick with humidity, and the sky remained overcast, mirroring our somber mood. We reached the small town of Ashland, the same town where I had parked my Subaru. The sheriff's office was a small, unassuming building, nestled between a diner and a hardware store. It felt incongruous, almost absurd, to bring such a monstrous tale into such a mundane setting. Sheriff Brody was a burly man with a kind, weathered face and tired eyes. He looked like he'd seen it all, from petty theft to domestic disputes, but nothing, I suspected, could prepare him for our story. Silas did most of the talking at first, his voice calm and steady, recounting the history of the past, his grandfather's journal, the disappearances, and the legend of the Weeper. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who knew his land and its secrets intimately. Sheriff Brody listened patiently, his expression unreadable, occasionally nodding, making a few notes. But I could see the skepticism in his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw. He clearly thought Silas was a well-meaning but eccentric old hermit, prone to tall tales. And then, Silas concluded, we went back to document, to find proof, and that's when Emily took these photographs. He gestured for me to open my laptop. I slid it across his desk, turning the screen towards him. I navigated to the folder containing the images. "These are from yesterday, Sheriff," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "We saw two of them, two weepers and a child, an offering." Sheriff Brody leaned forward, his tired eyes squinting at the screen. The first image was a wide shot of the tunnel entrance, then a zoom in. Then the first weeper stepping out of the darkness, its green eyes glowing. Then the second, smaller one carrying the bundle. And then the terrifying close-up of the child's tiny hand. His expression shifted. The skepticism began to crack, replaced by a dawning horror. He scrolled through the images, his breath catching in his throat. His face, usually ruddy, grew pale. He saw the altar, broken and defaced. He saw the new, sinister symbols. He saw the creatures in various stages of emergence, their unnatural forms undeniable. He stared at the image of the child's hand for a long moment, his jaw slack. "My God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "A child, is this real?" "It is, Sheriff," I affirmed, my gaze meeting his. "Every single detail. We saw it with our own eyes, and we were attacked by the creatures and by two hooded figures. They tried to stop us." Silas then added, "They're a cult, Sheriff. The Keepers, they've been active for generations. They lure people to the pass, or they take them and they offer them to these things." Sheriff Brody slowly pushed himself back from his desk, his eyes still fixed on the screen, a profound shock written all over his face. He picked up his phone, his hand trembling slightly. I need to make some calls. My deputies, state police. This is beyond anything I've ever encountered." He looked at us, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and dawning responsibility. "You expect me to believe in monsters, Silas, and a cult that feeds them?" "The photographs are undeniable, Sheriff," I stated, "and we were just attacked. My shoulder, it's still hurting from the fall. Silas had to use dynamite to get us away. Their truck was destroyed." He nodded slowly, processing. "Dynamite, you blew up a truck." He ran a hand over his face. All right, let me call this in. You two, you stay here, don't leave. This is evidence. You are witnesses, and you might be in danger." He began making calls, his voice low and urgent, the gravity of the situation slowly sinking in. We sat there, watching him, a tense mix of relief and renewed anxiety. We had taken the first step. We had brought the truth to light, but what would come next? It wasn't long before the small sheriff's office buzzed with activity. Two deputies arrived, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief as Sheriff Brody rapidly explained the situation, gesturing towards my laptop. Then the state police were called. Detectives from Portland, their expressions sharp and professional, arrived within a few hours, their initial skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence on my screen. They questioned us extensively, separately and together, for hours. They went over every detail, every minute of our experience. They asked about the weepers, their appearance, their movements, their sounds. They asked about the cultists, their clothing, their voices, their weapons. They asked about the altar, the symbols, the child. I recounted the story again and again, my words precise, backed by the irrefutable visual evidence. Silas corroborated every detail, adding his decades of knowledge about the past and his grandfather's journal. We showed them the relevant entries, the sketches, the chilling accounts. One of the detectives, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Miller, looked at me, her expression serious. "Ms. Hayes, you understand the implications of what you're saying? That there's a supernatural entity, a monster, taking children and a human cult assisting it." "I understand how unbelievable it sounds, Detective," I replied, my voice unwavering. "But I have the proof, and I have the scars, and I barely escaped with my life, and Silas almost died." Detective Miller looked at Silas, then back at me, a calculating glint in her eyes. "We'll need to send a team to the pass, forensics, search and rescue, to investigate the site, confirm the explosion, and search for evidence of the child." She paused, her voice hardening. "If this is true, Ms. Hayes, if there's an active cult involved in human sacrifice, we will bring them to justice. And if there's a monster, we'll figure out what to do." The "if" still lingered, but the change in tone was palpable. The photographs, the journal, Silas's steady conviction, and my own calm but firm demeanor were chipping away at their disbelief. They couldn't dismiss the evidence of a truck explosion or the clear images of the altar and the child's hand. They took my laptop, carefully bagging it as evidence. They took Silas's grandfather's journal, promising to handle it with care. They took our statements, detailed and sworn. "We need you two to remain here in Ashland," Detective Miller instructed. "For your safety and as key witnesses, we'll have a patrol car stationed nearby. Don't go back to the pass. Don't engage with anyone, just wait for our teams to secure the area." It felt strange, sitting in a motel room in Ashland, knowing that a full-scale police operation was unfolding in Blackwood Pass based on our incredible story. The relief was immense, knowing that the burden was no longer solely on our shoulders, but the anxiety persisted. What would they find? How would the cultists react? And what about the weepers? Would they simply wait, or would they retaliate? Silas paced the small motel room, his energy restless. "They'll find the altar, they'll find the black liquid, they might even find the remains of the cultists' truck. But the creatures, they move fast, they hide well. And the cultists themselves, they're ghosts in these woods. They'll disappear, melt into the shadows." "But they won't just disappear," I countered. "They'll be enraged. They'll know we went to the authorities. They'll know we exposed them." Silas agreed, his gaze fixed on the window. "That's what worries me. They've operated in the shadows for so long. They won't take kindly to the light being shown on them." Sure enough, the next few days were a blur of waiting and increasing tension. Police teams, forensic experts, and search and rescue personnel swarmed Blackwood Pass. We received sporadic updates from Sheriff Brody and Detective Miller. They confirmed the explosion site. They found remnants of the cultists' truck, scorched and twisted metal. They found no human remains at the explosion site, suggesting the cultists might have escaped the blast, though they were still unaccounted for. They found the tunnel entrance and they ventured inside. They found the side passage. They found the broken altar. They confirmed the black, viscous liquid, taking samples for analysis. They found the disturbed rock, the defaced symbols. But they found no signs of the weepers, no tracks, no visible traces. It was as if the creatures had simply vanished into thin air. And most agonizingly, they found no trace of the child. No bundle of rags, no tiny hand, no bones, nothing. The altar was empty. They cleaned it up, Silas murmured when Detective Miller delivered the news, his face grim. The cultists or the creatures, they removed the offering, they hid their tracks. Detective Miller looked frustrated. We have the photos, Ms. Hayes, that's a huge lead. But without physical evidence of the child, it's harder to make a full case for abduction or sacrifice. It gives the defense an out. But you saw the photos of the creatures, Detective, I pressed, and the altar, and the black liquid, and the new symbols. That's still evidence of an active, dangerous cult. It is, she conceded, and we're taking it very seriously. We've brought in specialists, occult experts, anthropologists, anyone who can make sense of the symbols, the rituals. We're launching a full-scale investigation into the Keepers of the Veil as Mr. Hayes described them. We're canvassing local communities, looking for anyone who might fit the description, any new disappearances that align with this pattern. The news was a mixed bag. On one hand, the authorities were taking us seriously. They were investigating. On the other, the lack of crucial physical evidence, especially of the child, meant their hands were somewhat tied. And the fact that the weepers had vanished and the cultists were still at large meant the threat was far from over. The next few weeks were a strange limbo. We remained in Ashland under a loose form of protective custody. My Subaru was retrieved from the clinic parking lot, a strange symbol of my return to some semblance of normalcy, even though nothing felt normal. I spent hours helping the detectives, poring over maps of the pass, identifying potential cultist hideouts, translating Silas's grandfather's journal entries. The forensic analysis of the black liquid was inconclusive. It was organic, but unlike anything they could readily identify. It had strange, corrosive properties and trace elements that didn't match anything in their databases. It was categorized as an unknown biological substance of unusual composition. Another mystery. The occult experts were equally baffled by the symbols. Some recognized ancient runic patterns, others indigenous tribal markings, but the combination and the new crawling insect symbol were unknown. They agreed it pointed to a syncretic, likely dangerous belief system. During this time, I grew closer to Silas. We shared meals, talked late into the night, our bond forged in shared terror and defiance. He told me more stories of the mountains, of his family, of the strange occurrences his grandfather had witnessed. He became a surrogate father figure, a grounded presence in a world that had become utterly fantastical. One evening, about 3 weeks after the incident, Detective Miller came to our motel room, her face grave. "We have something," she said, her voice low. "It's not good. We've had 2 more disappearances in the last few days from a campground about 20 miles north of the pass. A family. The parents are missing. Their 2 young children were found abandoned in their tent, unharmed but terrified." My blood ran cold. "The cultists," I whispered. They're still active. They're trying to re-establish the connection, to rebuild the altar. Silas slammed his fist on the table. They're making a statement. They're showing us they won't be stopped, that the Weeper still demands its due. We believe you're right, Detective Miller confirmed. We found signs of a new ritual site, crude, hastily built, deep in the woods near the campground, but no altar yet, and no direct evidence of the Weeper, just more of that black liquid. And this, she pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small, intricately carved bone figure. It was shaped like a bird, small and delicate. My breath hitched. Tommy Peterson, I whispered, remembering the journal entry. March 4th, 1941, young Tommy Peterson lost near the pass. His father found his boots, a single small bone carved like a bird. Said the boy was always curious about the tunnel. Silas's eyes widened. My God, the cultists are leaving warnings or taunts. They're telling us they're still here, still at work. Detective Miller looked at us, her expression grim. We're expanding our search. We're calling in federal resources. This has escalated beyond anything we can handle locally. We're talking about a serial abduction case, possibly with a ritualistic component. But still, no bodies, no direct evidence of the monster, just this chilling pattern. The federal agents arrived a few days later. They were a different breed, sharper, more intense, less tolerant of supernatural explanations, even with the mounting evidence. They focused on the cult aspect, dismissing the Weepers as local folklore or a manifestation of shared hallucination, despite my photographs. They were interested in the human element, the abductions, the potential for a vast, organized criminal network. They wanted to use us as bait. We need to go back to the pass, one of the federal agents, a stern, unsmiling man named Agent Thorne, informed us. You two are the only ones who truly know the terrain, who have faced these perpetrators. We want to set up a sting operation. You go in, act as if you're trying to find evidence again. We'll be watching, listening, ready to move in when the cultists show themselves. I bristled. And what about the Weepers, Agent Thorne? Your men aren't equipped to handle something like that. He gave me a condescending look. Ms. Hayes, our primary objective is to apprehend the human element. The cultists, we're not going to chase ghosts. We'll have tactical teams armed and ready. Your role is to draw them out, to lead us to their leadership, to where they might be holding the victims. Silas, however, saw the opportunity. It's a gamble, Emily, he murmured to me, but it might be our only way to expose them fully, to force their hand, and perhaps to lead us to where they keep the stolen children. The thought of the missing children, of the families devastated, burned in my mind. If there was a chance, any chance to find them, to stop this, I had to take it. I'll do it, I said, my voice firm, but on my terms. We go in our way, we have our own equipment, and if the Weepers show, your men need to understand the danger. They are not human, they are not normal, they are something else entirely. Agent Thorne reluctantly agreed to our conditions, mostly because he had no other viable leads. We spent the next week in intense training with the federal agents, going over maps, communication protocols, emergency procedures. We were equipped with discrete comms, GPS trackers, and compact, high-powered firearms, standard issue for the agents, but a new and unsettling addition to our gear. Silas, ever the pragmatist, insisted on bringing our own protective items. Bundles of fresh sage, small bags of salt, and his grandfather's rattle. The agents tolerated it, seeing it as a harmless eccentricity, perhaps even a psychological crutch, but I knew in my gut that these ancient remedies might be our only true defense. The plan was simple yet terrifyingly dangerous. We would re-enter Blackwood Pass, heading towards the tunnel entrance. We would set up a new observation post, acting as if we were once again trying to gather evidence. Our goal was to appear vulnerable, to draw out the cultists, who would undoubtedly be watching the area after the previous incident. Federal tactical teams would be strategically positioned around the pass, hidden, ready to move in at our signal or at the first sign of a threat to us. A drone would provide aerial surveillance and thermal cameras would monitor the tree lines. The night before the operation, I sat with Silas by the fireplace in his cabin. We had returned there as it was our base of operations for the mission, despite the lingering danger. The cabin was now bristling with discreet surveillance equipment, microphones, and hidden cameras. "This is it, Emily," Silas said, his voice quiet, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "We're walking into the lion's den, again." "This is it, Emily," Silas said, his voice quiet, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "We're walking into the lion's den, again." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle heavy in the cabin's silence. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, now bristling with discreet surveillance equipment. Microphones, hidden cameras, and comms gear lay neatly organized on the table, a stark contrast to the bundles of sage and rock salt beside them. The blend of ancient and modern felt surreal, a testament to the bizarre reality we now inhabited. "We have to," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "For the children, for the families." Silas reached across the table, placing a calloused hand over mine. "I know, just promise me you'll stick to the plan, no heroics. If things go sideways, you fall back to the rally point. Don't engage if you don't have to." "You too, Silas," I said, meeting his gaze. "We stick together, we get out together." He gave a tight nod, a shared understanding passing between us. The federal agents, for all their talk of tactical superiority, didn't truly grasp what we were up against. They saw a criminal cult, we saw an ancient evil tethered to a human one. Our true allies were the sage, the salt, and the lessons from Silas's grandfather's journal. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay on the worn cot, listening to the cabin settle, to the rhythmic drumming of rain on the tin roof. Every creak, every gust of wind sounded like an approaching threat. My mind replayed the images from the tunnel, the child's tiny hand, the weeper's glowing eyes, the cultist's predatory glint. The weight of the world, of all the innocent lives lost and still at risk, pressed down on me. When dawn broke, it was a cold, gray light, typical of a mountain spring day still fighting off winter's chill. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. We ate a silent breakfast, our gear already packed. The high-powered firearms Agent Thorne had given us felt heavy, cold, and utterly alien. I preferred the familiar weight of my camera and the comfort of the sage in my pack. "A comms check," Agent Thorne's voice crackled through our earpieces, startling me. "We're in position, Ms. Hayes, Mr. Hayes. All teams are go. Drone is airborne. Thermal imaging online." "Copy that, Thorne," Silas responded, his voice calm and professional, belying the tension in his eyes. "We're moving out." We stepped out of the cabin, the heavy door thudding shut behind us. The air was still and cold. The forest was hushed, almost expectant. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath. We moved slowly, deliberately, towards the designated insertion point, a logging road about a mile from the main pass. Our approach was meticulously planned. We wouldn't go directly to the tunnel entrance. Instead, we would backtrack, taking a circuitous route to one of Silas's grandfather's old observation points, a hidden ledge overlooking the pass about half a mile from the tunnel. It was a place the cultists might expect us to use, but also provided excellent cover. The idea was to appear to be re-establishing our surveillance to draw them out. As we moved through the dense forest, the silence was broken only by the crunch of our boots on pine needles and the occasional rustle of leaves. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My hand instinctively went to the small, compact firearm holstered at my hip. It felt absurd, a modern trinket against an ancient, unknowable horror. Salas, however, moved with the quiet grace of a seasoned woodsman, his rifle held ready, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. He seemed to draw strength from the land, a deep connection to its rhythms and its dangers. "We're approaching the western ridge," Silas murmured into his comms, his voice barely a whisper. "ETA to observation point, 5 minutes. "A copy, Hayes," Agent Thorne replied. "All eyes on you. Remember, minimal engagement. We want their leaders." The ascent to the observation point was steep and treacherous, but Silas navigated it with ease. I followed closely, my muscles burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The constant fear gnawing at me made everything harder. Finally, we reached the ledge. It was a natural overhang, shrouded by thick fir trees, offering an unobstructed view of the clearing below and the dark maw of the tunnel entrance. It was exactly as I remembered it from our previous trips, only now it felt less like a vantage point and more like a stage. "In position," Silas reported, pulling out his binoculars. He scanned the area below, his gaze lingering on the tunnel entrance, then sweeping the surrounding tree line. No visible activity. I pulled out my camera, the familiar weight a small comfort. It was a prop now, part of the deception. I clicked a few shots of the tunnel, just for show, hoping the glint of the lens would be visible to any distant observers. The waiting began. Hours crawled by, the drone hummed faintly high above a distant bee. The wind picked up, rustling the branches, creating a symphony of creaks and groans that played tricks on my ears. My eyes ached from straining, searching for any sign of movement, any flicker of shadow that didn't belong. The cold seeped into my bones. "Anything, Emily?" Silas whispered, his voice low. I shook my head, my jaw tight. "Nothing, just trees and rocks." The tension was unbearable. It was like waiting for a predator to strike, knowing it was out there, watching, but not knowing from where or when. The cultists were masters of stealth, of operating in the shadows. They wouldn't be easily fooled. "Thorne, this is Hayes," Silas said into his comms. "We're getting nothing here. They're either not present or they're well hidden." "Maintain position, Hayes," Thorne's voice cut in. "They're patient. They know you're here. They'll make their move when they're ready." As if on cue, a faint rustle caught my attention. Not the wind. It was too deliberate, too close. I gripped my camera, my heart hammering against my ribs. Silas saw it too, his eyes narrowed, fixed on a patch of dense undergrowth about 50 yards from our position, just below the ridge. "Movement," he whispered, raising his rifle. 10 o'clock below us. Through the leaves, I caught a glimpse of dark fabric, a hooded figure, partially obscured, moving slowly, cautiously. Then another, and another. 3 of them melting out of the shadows, making their way towards the clearing, but staying hidden in the dense foliage. "Cultists," I breathed, my voice tight. 3 of them heading towards the tunnel. Thorn, this is Hayes, Silas reported, his voice crisp. Contact, 3 figures, hooded, moving towards the tunnel entrance. They're staying low. Copy that, Hayes, Thorn replied, a note of triumph in his voice. Teams are moving into position. Hold tight. Let them think they have the advantage. The cultists were not directly approaching us. They were circling, heading towards the main clearing, towards the tunnel, staying out of sight from our immediate vantage point. It seemed they had planned to cut off our escape route from the tunnel, or perhaps prepare an ambush within. Suddenly, one of the cultists stopped. He raised a hand, turning his head slowly as if sniffing the air. I held my breath, afraid he might have sensed us. Then his gaze, even under the hood, seemed to fix on something specific. The tunnel. He produced a small leather pouch from within his cloak. He knelt, placing it on the ground. The other 2 cultists joined him, forming a tight circle. They began to chant, a low, guttural murmur that barely carried on the wind, but which seemed to vibrate through the very earth. "They're starting a ritual," Silas whispered, his face grim. "They're attempting to reopen the connection, to re-establish the altar's power." My blood ran cold. The thought of them summoning the weepers again, of another child being taken, filled me with a desperate fury. "Thorn," Silas hissed into his comms. "They're performing a ritual. They're calling the creatures." "Stand by, Hayes," Thorn commanded. "We need to identify their leader. Wait for our signal." But I couldn't wait. The chanting grew louder, more rhythmic, punctuated by a low, mournful wail that was unmistakably not human. It was coming from deep within the tunnel. "They're coming," I gasped, pointing towards the tunnel entrance where a faint, sickly green glow was beginning to emanate from the darkness. "The weepers are coming." Silas swore under his breath. "Thorn, we're losing time. The creatures are responding." "I repeat, stand by." Thorn's voice was sharp, impatient. "Do not compromise the operation. We need the cultists." But the situation was escalating rapidly. The green glow intensified, pulsating from the tunnel mouth. The chanting of the cultists grew more fervent, their bodies swaying in unison, and the mournful wail was joined by the familiar, horrifying clicks and whistles. "We have to stop them, Silas," I pleaded, my heart racing, "before they fully manifest." Silas hesitated, torn between the agent's orders and the undeniable urgency of the threat. The green light pulsed, closer now, illuminating the first hints of a spindly limb emerging from the darkness. "Damn it," Silas growled, making his decision. He pulled a small, modified explosive charge from his pack, another one of his grandfather's stump removers, fitted with a remote detonator. "I'm going to disrupt their ritual. It won't get the cultists, but it'll scare the creatures back." "No, Hayes, hold your position. That's an order." Thorn's voice was furious, but Silas ignored him. He aimed carefully, then activated the small detonator. "Down," he yelled, pushing me down just as he pressed the button. Crumpet. The explosion was smaller than the one that destroyed the truck, more of a concussive blast than a fiery eruption. It detonated right in the center of the cultists' circle, tearing up the earth, scattering them. The chanting immediately ceased. The cultists screamed, scrambling away, their cloaks fluttering. One of them lay still, while the other 2, disoriented, stumbled back into the trees. The green glow from the tunnel entrance faltered, receding for a moment, and the clicks and whistles grew agitated, confused. Move in, Thorn's voice roared, his frustration momentarily forgotten, replaced by urgency. All teams engage the cultists. A flurry of activity erupted from the surrounding tree lines. Federal agents, clad in tactical gear, burst forth, their assault rifles raised, their comms crackling. They swarmed the clearing, fanning out, targeting the fleeing cultists. But they weren't the only ones responding. From deep within the tunnel, a thunderous roar erupted, a sound of absolute, unadulterated rage. The ground trembled. The green glow surged forth, brighter, more malevolent than before. Sela's look, I cried, pointing. The larger Weeper, the one we had faced before, burst from the tunnel entrance. Its size was even more terrifying up close, its mottled hide shimmering, its vast, spindly limbs ending in bone-like claws. Its green eyes burned with an intensity that promised utter destruction. It ignored the agents, ignored the fleeing cultists, its gaze fixed on the source of the blast, then sweeping up towards our position. It knew. "They're here, the monsters are here," I heard an agent shout, his voice laced with terror as the creature let out another deafening shriek. "Engage, suppressive fire," Agent Thorn commanded, his voice tight with surprise and a hint of fear. But the agent's rifles, effective against human targets, seemed to have little effect on the Weeper. Bullets ricocheted off its hide or passed through it as if it were made of smoke, merely enraging it further. It snarled, a sound of pure malice, and began to advance, its impossibly long strides covering ground with terrifying speed. "They're flanking us!" another agent screamed. The smaller Weeper, its green eyes blazing, had emerged silently from the tunnel, darting low to the ground, moving with unbelievable speed around the perimeter, heading towards the agents who were trying to contain the cultists. "Silas, they're not listening, their bullets do nothing," I yelled, fear clawing at my throat.